A downpour raged in the yard, and lightning pierced the night sky, dispersing the darkness with a dazzling glow. Surrounded by silence and the sounds of rain, the divine swordsman Kyuchi rested on the terrace with a cup of tea. Suddenly, he heard steps from the terrace, abruptly put the cup on the table, making a loud knock that broke the silence, and with a wary expression on his face asked who was there. A dark figure came out of the darkness, stepped forward, and said that he was an assassin from the Department of Dead Souls. Kyuchi returned to his cup of tea and wondered what brought the assassin to him. The stranger, shrouded in darkness, stood motionless in the rain, his face hidden in the shadows under his hat, and in a hoarse voice he said that his job was to kill. Kyuchi finished his last sip of tea and asked if he was a murderer. Shouldn't he be sitting and hiding? Why was he showing himself? To which the unknown replied that he would make an exception for the divine swordsman because of his reputation. Standing up from his chair and taking his sword in his hands, Kyuchi said that he didn't need mercy. After that, he began to take steps forward, approaching the unknown, and asked what his name was. The unknown, still hidden in the shadows, held his straw hat in his hand and answered that his name was Asura. After that, Asura took off his hat, which surprised the swordsman. After all, he did not expect that the leader of the Departments of Dead Souls would visit him personally. In an instant, Asura took out his sword and attacked the Kyuchi swordsman with lightning speed. But he managed to take a step back and was able to evade the enemy's blow. With the coolness of a skilled swordsman, Kyuchi raised his sword to defend against the attack. He parried the attack with his sword, and the clang of swords cut through the silence of the night. After that, Kyuchi began to attack, the tension building with each strike, as each move could be his last. The swordsman expertly kicked Asura in the stomach with all his might. The sudden blow caught Asura off balance, but no sooner had he recovered from the blow than he looked up at the mountain to see the swordsman leaping straight at him to deliver the final blow. The swordsman didn't have time to hit Asura as he jumped to the side, dodging the blow. They stood facing each other, and Kyuchi asked if he could find out who ordered the assassination on him. But Asura could not tell, because they had such a code. But Kyuchi wanted to know who was behind the order to kill him, because he didn't want to worry about it for the rest of his life. Without answering anything, Asura just stood there silently and looked at him. Asura's silence inflames the swordsman's anger even more. He started shouting if he really thought that the divine swordsman had no eyes and no ears. After that, he laughed and said that Asura had completely forgotten his roots and dared to attack him without a twinge of conscience. Gritting his teeth, Asura replied that his respect for the swordsman was ending right now. With great speed and fury in his eyes, he pushed off the ground and attacked the swordsman. But Kyuchi managed to block the shot, but said that he was making a big mistake. Their swords collided with such force that it seemed as if the sky split in half, and they were pushed in different directions. Every blow was filled with fury and hatred. Every movement meant to inflict pain and death. The swordsman attacked Asura, but he skillfully dodged all of the swordsman's attacks. After that, Asura jumped high above the ground, gained speed, and attacked from behind his opponent with incredible precision, delivering a powerful blow. Despite Asura's sudden and swift jump, Kyuchi managed to react in a flash and expertly block the attack using all of his fighting skills. But he hit the hired killer hard in the face. From such a blow, Asura flew away from the swordsman, falling to the ground. Raising his sword to the mountain to deliver the final blow, the swordsman hoped that Asura realized what a huge mistake he had made. Lying on the ground, he stood up and stared at the swordsman, his eyes blazing with hatred. But it was already too late to ask for mercy from the swordsman. He was preparing to strike a decisive blow. In the last seconds, Asura took the mud in his hands and threw it directly at the swordsman. A sudden flurry of mud caught the swordsman off guard, forcing him to cover himself with his sleeve for a moment. The swordsman said that it was childish enough, and he was interested in where the skills of the hired killer had gone. Removing his hand, he saw how kunai started flying at him. With lightning speed, the swordsman moved, blocking every kunai that flew at him. But while the kunai distracted the swordsman, Asura used the opportunity to attack. Asura screamed and struck the swordsman hard in the stomach. Before Kyuchi could recover, Asura quickly took the sword from him. After that, he turned his back to him and struck a decisive blow. The swordsman gripped Asura's kimono in pain. His face twisted into a grimace and his eyes closed. He said that he would be making a big mistake in his life if he let that boy into the house. And from that moment, everything would go smoothly. Gritting his teeth, the last thing he managed to say was that Asura was just like him, that he was no different. After these words, Asura drew his sword, and the swordsman fell to the ground unconscious. The sword fell to the ground with a loud clang. Asura raised his head to the mountain and dropped to his knees. His heart was breaking with pain. He began to apologize to his brothers, begging for forgiveness. The plot moves to several years later, where two friends persuade a boy named Zhang Li to show off his extraordinary abilities once again, but he refuses. After all, his older brother said not to do that again, but his friends did not understand why his brother forbids him to have fun, to which Zhang Li replied that people would call him possessed by spirits. But his friends started to calm him down, because they never thought of him that way. But young Li thought it was because they were his friends. Suddenly, one of the friend's mothers started calling her and told him to quickly come to her, and Meng said goodbye to his friends and walked in the direction of his mother. His mother began to beat him for disobeying her, because she asked him not to communicate with young Li. She believed that he had a bad influence on her son, and ordered him to immediately go to his room and sit down to study. Young Li walked forward, followed by his friend. Looking back, he said that this would be the last time. They entered the alley and found a small hole in the wall of the house. Bending over this deep, dark hole, Chong concentrated and began to whisper, calling for the mice to appear. After that, he fell silent and began to listen carefully to see if the mice had heard him. After a few tense seconds, a soft rustling and creaking of small paws confirmed that his call had been heard, and the mice were already approaching him. Convinced that everything worked out, Chong told his friend that everything was ready and they should run away quickly. They ran and sat in front of this house and began to look forward to an interesting performance. Chong Li began to count to 3, and as he counted, loud screams were heard. Their eyes were fixed on the place where they called the mice. They were waiting and silently contemplated what was going to happen. A frightened woman ran out of the house suddenly and quickly. She saw mice running around the floor. She screamed in fear, trying to shake off the little creatures, and looked around in panic, looking for help. People who had lunch in this building did not believe what they heard. Many mice started running across the floor. People did not understand what was happening. It was a big bunch of mice that started gnawing everything they saw in their path, but no one could understand where so many of them came from. They jumped on the tables, overturned all the plates, squealed loudly. They tried to catch them, but it was useless because there were so many of them. Complete chaos began. Some tried to catch them. Some climbed as high as possible away from them. Some simply ran away from there. Then the fabric canopy fell. People were frightened by what was happening, and Zhang Li and his friend, watching this, could not contain themselves and began to burst into loud laughter. But their fun was interrupted by En-man, who ran to meet them and called out to John. Young Li, holding back his laughter, looked around and stared at En-meng, waiting for his words. En-meng, barely catching his breath, said that the owner of the establishment was looking for Chona, and he needed to go to him urgently. Chong looked at him in surprise and did not understand why there was such urgency. Yi Yun-meng told him the terrible news that will make little John Li's whole life divided into before and after. Today, his brother was attacked and severely beaten, which ended in his death. Chong ran to the scene and saw his dead brother on the ground. The owner of the establishment was sitting next to him, who said that working in a drinking establishment, it is quite possible to get hit on the head. But how could you beat a child to death? As Zhang fell to the ground, unable to hear or see anything going on around him, his heart clenched in excruciating grief and his knees buckled, forcing him to fall next to his brother's body. Overwhelmed by complete despair, he did not know what to do next, because he was left completely alone in the whole white world. The owner was about to leave and prepare for the burials when John asked him who killed his brother. Unsure of what he heard, the owner turned to Chan and told him to repeat his words. John asked again because he wanted to find out who did this to his brother. The owner did not understand why he should know this. Was Chong going to take revenge? Chong could not be interfered with, and it was better for him to forget what happened and move on with his life. The owner was sure his brother would have told him the same thing, but Chong wanted to at least know who it was. With tears in his eyes, he began to beg to tell, because then he would at least be able to curse the murderer. Soon the diggers finished burying his brother, filling the last lumps of earth on the fresh grave. At first they called him with them, but when they saw his condition, they decided that it was better to leave him alone and leave. After all, it was clearly not easy for him to say goodbye to his last relative. He felt lonely and abandoned because with the loss of his brother, he lost the last support in life, the one who was always there, supported in difficult times and shared joyful moments. With anger and hatred in his heart, he twisted Huang Zheng's name because he was the one who killed his brother, and he decided to take revenge no matter what. At this time, Huang Zheng himself, staggering from the drink, wandered through the streets, shifting his legs unsteadily and barely staying on his feet. Inspiring terror with his appearance, he wandered the streets, scaring passers-by, who shrank from him like a ghost. People were running away from him, not understanding what was happening to him, and Chong just laughed loudly, making unpleasant hoarse sounds that broke the silence of the night. A man who was just passing by involuntarily glanced at him, causing Huang Zheng to become aggressive, and he began to threaten. But the man just walked on without paying attention. Chong continued walking down the street, laughing loudly and threatening to die immediately if anyone got in his way. Suddenly, he turned his attention to one of the alleys, which was completely flooded with sewage. The disgusting smell made him nauseous, and he leaned against the wall and just stood and looked at the alley. He was so disgusted by this smell that he almost sobered up. But he had no idea that he was walking into a trap set by a boy who sought revenge for the death of his brother. Behind the wall behind him was young Lee, who started the countdown. He thought out the trap in detail. There was an arrow stuck in the wall behind Zhang's back. On the opposite side of the wall, a spade was fixed to the arrow, the thrust of which was supposed to pierce Zhang through. Counting to 3, Zhang lunged forward with determination, ready to push down on the shovel with all his might. Zhang, hearing footsteps, became alert and prepared to catch the scoundrel. With hatred in his eyes, Chong leaped high towards the shovel with incredible speed, in order to deal a fatal blow to Zhang. Like lightning, Chong struck the blade with all his might, piercing Zhang through and through. Exhausted by the incredible effort, Chong fell to the ground. Zhang began to lose consciousness, his eyes closing and his body weakening. Behind the wall, only raspy, intermittent sighs reached Chong, and then they ended and Chong died. John left the city and hid far away in the forest away from people. In order to visit him and bring food, his friend Meng came, and Meng couldn't find him, so Zhang gave him a sign of his location. But he showed him with his hand that he should be quieter and not make noise. Entering John's temporary shelter, Yunmen took the food he had brought him, and John thanked him for his concern. And Meng asked in surprise what Zhang was doing here, to which Zhang replied with a smile that he was playing hide and seek. And Meng asked who was looking for him, to which Zhang replied that he was playing with himself. With a smile, Meng said that it must be a lot of fun, and Li was silent in response. Li inquired if there had been anything interesting lately, and Meng started to talk about everything that had happened, mentioning Chun-san's punishment, but Li cut him off, explaining that he didn't mean that. Meng began to remember all the recent events, and remembered a scary event. The bodies of dead boys were recently found dumped in an alley. After that, Li told his friend that he was leaving the village because his brother was not around, and he no longer had a reason to stay. He decided to go on a trip around the world and find out how big this world is. The friend wanted to go with Li, but his mother prevented him from doing so. Meng said that before leaving, John should visit the owner of the diner because he was looking for him a lot and worried that Li would not do something stupid. Chong obeyed his friend and wanted to sneak into the diner inconspicuously to say goodbye. Stealth like mice, they slipped through the alleys, gradually approaching the diner. And almost approaching, they noticed people, and in order not to give themselves away, hid behind the barrels. Friends rejoiced and laughed. They finally managed the last point of the plan. But the joy on Meng's face suddenly faded as he was overcome with worry for his friend. He wondered if he would ever come back, but Jung assured him that he would. Saying goodbye, Meng finally said that Zhang must visit him. Trying not to attract attention, Li crept up to the door of the diner, and after opening the door, Li was horrified to see how 3 unknown men were brutally beating the owner of the diner. One of them, clutching his master's clothes, turned and gave Li a terrible look. With horror in his eyes, Li held his breath as his heart began to beat at a frantic rate. The owner burst into a scream, not holding back his emotions, shouting for Chong to leave the diner immediately. Without delaying a second, Zhang closed the door of the diner and rushed out of there. The pursuers rushed after him, but he quickly ran on. Hoping to get lost in the crowd, Li ran straight there, but his pursuers did not give up and continued to chase him. Jun made his way through the crowd, trying to get out of sight of his pursuers as quickly as possible. Forcefully forcing their way through the crowd, the pursuers were not going to give Li any chance of escape. Breaking out of the crowd, Zhang rushed forward, constantly glancing anxiously over his shoulder. Running through the alleys, Li suddenly noticed a hole in the old fence and without thinking, made his way through it, ending up on the other side of the street. The pursuers did not have time to catch Chong, who quickly disappeared from their sight, leaving them in confusion. Realizing that they had lost Li's trail, the pursuers decided to split up and go around the street on the other side. At that time, Chong quickly made his way through the hole in the fence to the other side of the street with his hands and feet. After climbing out of the hole, Chong immediately noticed one of his pursuers, who also noticed him. The pursuer, full of determination, started to run towards Chong, ready to grab him and put an end to his escape. Lee instantly jumped onto the roof, giving his pursuer no chance to grab him. In order to throw Chong off the roof, the pursuer threw a heavy bucket full of leaves at him with all his might. After missing Lee, the bucket hit the roof, damaging its shingles. Holding his breath, Chong ran across the roof to escape his pursuer. Without stopping, the pursuer rushed after Chong, who nimbly jumped from one roof to another. With each jump, Chong felt the fragile roof crack under his feet. While preparing to jump to other roofs, suddenly a tile broke under his foot. As he slid across the tiles, he lost his balance and began to fall, desperately trying to catch hold of something. A heavy impact to the ground threw Chong onto his back, causing him to find it very difficult to breathe, and he clutched his chest in pain, feeling his breath take away. Despite the severe pain and dizziness, gathering his last strength, he got up from the ground, ignoring the piercing pain throughout his body, and ran on. Chong raced through the narrow lanes without wasting a second. Suddenly, he was stopped and squeezed by a strong hand. Chong was petrified. Cold fear pierced his body. It was the pursuer who grabbed Chong by the collar, lifted him above the ground, and then threw him to the ground with all his might. Lee began to suffocate from the excruciating pain, and the pursuer could not believe that Hwang Jung could have been killed by a child. With anger and hatred in his eyes, Lee blurted out that Hwang Jung had killed his brother. Clutching the hilt of the sword, the pursuer said that Chong had taken his brother's life, and Lee had taken revenge. So after his death, the circle would close, this chain of revenge would stop. Overcome with rage, Chong burst into screams as he began to scream for his pursuer to kill him. Already ready to die, Lee covered his face with his hands and closed his eyes. But suddenly, he felt the blade stop without touching him. Opening his eyes, he saw how an unknown person hit the pursuer on the head. The pursuer lost consciousness and fell to the ground next to Chong. The unknown said that Chong would most likely be persecuted by the Heavenly Death Sect for the rest of his life. Smiling and extending his hand to Lee, he offered to go with him. With no other options, he was forced to accept the offer, which seemed to be his only chance. And that same day in the evening, they set off. When they arrived at their destination, they were greeted by Cho's new teacher. While dismounting Lee from the horse, the fifth brother said that this young boy would eventually surpass himself and not be inferior to his brother's disciples. The fifth brother told Chong to say hello to his new teacher, and he said hello and gave his name. The teacher said that a meeting was waiting for the fifth brother in the hall, but he did not understand what had happened. The teacher himself did not know what was happening, but it seemed to him that the older brother wanted to tell something. The fifth brother ordered the teacher to take Lee to the room, and he himself went to the meeting hall. Bringing Chong into the room, he introduced him and said that they now have a new member of the family. Lee called out to the teacher, inviting him into the room. Crossing the threshold of the room, Lee saw 3 children his age. Meanwhile, the fifth brother appeared in the meeting hall. When he sat down at the table, he was told that they knew about his successor, and with interest, they asked to tell in detail how everything went. To which he replied that in many ways Lee was inferior to most students, but he was sure that they would still need him. The main thing was to teach correctly. After that, the fifth brother said that his name was Chu Chong Lee, and his 13th brother was beaten to death in a diner due to alcohol abuse. Because of this, Chong found the culprit and took revenge by simply killing him. And the same drunken culprit was Hwang Jung from the Heavenly Death Sect. Everyone in the hall was shocked and could not believe it. There were rumors that Hwang Jung died in a pile of garbage, but it actually turned out to be Jung Lee's handiwork. They began to praise the fifth brother for having found a talented student, and sincerely congratulated him on this find. After interrupting the conversation, the fifth brother thought that the elder brother wanted to say something. Knocking his glass lightly on the table, the elder brother announced that since everyone was finally in the meeting, he proposed to start discussing work points. Getting up from his chair, he began to ask for forgiveness from his brothers. At that time, there was silence in the room where Chong was, and he carefully examined his surroundings. Suddenly, the silence of the room was broken by the boy who sat across from Chong, knocking on the table. Immediately after that, the boy began to laugh loudly, and Lee looked at him in surprise. Suddenly, the smile left his face and he asked how much. But Jung didn't know what he was talking about, after which he asked how many people he had killed, and Jung stared at him in horror. A creepy smile appeared on his face, and he said that he had killed 16 people, and if Jung killed more, then he would be higher in status. Otherwise, he would obey him. He then pointed to the girl sitting on the bed and said that her name was Seo Yoon, who was below him in rank because she was only able to kill one old man. With her head held high and a look of disdain, Yoon told him to shut up, threatening trouble. With a smile, Han turned to Chong, saying that Yoon was a bit harsh, but at the time she was very sweet, and he shouldn't even think about her, because she was his. Han pointed to the boy behind him and said that his name is Chok Sa, but he is very quiet, so almost nothing is known about him. With a horrified look, he looked up and declared that he had not killed anyone, but it was easy for him to get Gan out of the way, so he advised silence. And Gang told Chong that it was better to stay away from Chok Sa. After that, Han asked Lee again how many people he had killed, but Lee just looked at him and remained silent. What angered Han was that Chong just continued to look around in silence, wondering if he really didn't understand why he was brought here. With his eyes downcast, Chong barely whispered that he was being chased and saved. At that time in the meeting hall, the elder brother fell to his knees and began to ask forgiveness from the brothers. Stunned, the brothers abruptly got up from their seats, not understanding what their older brother was apologizing for. With his eyes downcast, the elder brother said that he had killed the divine swordsman Kyuchi. From the words of the elder brother, a grave silence reigned in the hall, and everyone present froze in a stupor. Not believing his ears, one of the brothers asked if he really killed him, to which the older brother barely said that he was ashamed to look them in the eye. The fifth brother was indignant and said, "What's the matter, because they've already killed enough people?" The older brother stunned them with even more shocking news. He rushed to them and forgot about the scabbard, and now the whole world would know of his tragic demise and that his death was at the hands of the Dead Soul Squad. The brothers did not understand how it happened because he never made mistakes, and it seemed that he had personal reasons for accepting this order. The third brother said that it was not for nothing that he had a strange premonition when some woman was looking for the elder brother, but he did not attach much importance to it because he trusted him. After which he began to shout that the elder brother had decided to leave them and leave the Dead Soul Squad just to avenge that woman. The insulting words angered one of the brothers, and he slapped him on the cheek. The brothers were shocked and asked how he could say such a thing. Not wanting to escalate the situation, the third brother apologized, turned and silently walked to the exit. He slammed the door loudly and left the meeting room and quickly headed for the exit. While the other brothers reassured the elder brother, they told him not to take the third brother's words to heart, because he did not want to offend him. With a heavy sigh, he said that the third brother was not wrong. The brothers understood that the 10 great sects would blame them for everything and try to destroy them. Elder brother asked for help in dealing with the 10 great sects, and he accepts the destruction. Everyone was shocked by this news, but he said that it would be fulfilled tomorrow. The fifth brother was indignant, because they could not give up. They had to fight to the end. Everyone agreed with him, and what difference did it make to them? It was better to die in battle or in flight, and reminded him of Sogo. They had to think about the future of the Dead Soul Squad. The fifth brother said that the Dead Soul Squad would continue to exist, because as long as Sogo existed, even if everyone died, they had to jump at the chance to save him, and there was no reason not to try. The brothers just stood silently and understood that they had no other choice. Meanwhile, impenetrable darkness enveloped the Nanyang Beggars Association. Bending over the sleeping commander of the unit, the servant began to call him in order to wake him up. The commander stood up and asked what had happened, to which the servant replied that the Shaolin monks were looking for him. But the commander did not understand why the Shaolin monks were looking for him. Without delay, he jumped up and headed towards them, and when he arrived, he saw 3 monarchs in front of him. The commander asked what brought the monarchs to such a god-forsaken place, after which he greeted and said that his name was Chun Ye-yu. The monarchs said that they were here to report the decision that had been made at the meeting of the 10 great sects. The commander did not understand what meeting it was about, but the monarch said that the decision was made at this meeting to destroy the killer of the divine swordsman Kyuchi, Asura, and the monarch held out the documents that related to the destruction and the portraits of the killers of the squad of dead souls. After they gave all the information to the information, they said goodbye and left. The people turned to the commander, asking if their leader was really going to be killed, and the commander confirmed their fears. But the commander, looking at those documents, did not even know what destruction meant. At that time, the third brother was standing outside and looking at the stars and did not want to enter the room. He thought that it was very difficult for the first brother now after this terrible situation. Suddenly behind him, he heard the voice of the first brother calling him. Bowing down, he started to apologize for his rudeness, but his older brother stopped him, saying that there was no need to apologize because everything was fine. The older brother said that it was his mistake, the cause of all this mess, and they only had one night, and they shouldn't waste precious time arguing. The third brother was deeply moved by his words, but he still asked not to forgive him. to which the elder brother told him not to say that, because he is still the leader of the Dead Souls squad. The reason they were able to stay free in a world of lawlessness and bloodshed was destruction. And if this continues, then the whole world will be consumed by evil, and nothing will help them. So the 10 great sects came up with the idea of destruction. Destruction prevents evil. It restricts people from joining the demonic sects of the Central Plains. The commander said that there was enough talking and asked to explain normally what should be done. One of the people began to tell that the Dead Soul Squad had decided to kill the Divine Swordsman for no reason. And in order to save the rest, the killer Asura made a decision to destroy, and the commander had to carry out the execution. But the commander himself did not know how to do it. The old man explained that one must first deprive the sight and hearing, and block the Zhongwan and Shuhai points to close the energy flow. In other words, the person must turn into a walking corpse. The commander was shocked by what he heard. A cold sweat began to flow from him, and one thought about it troubled his consciousness. But the old man continued that this does not mean that we give a squad of dead souls a chance to survive. On the contrary, they will make every effort to catch everyone together. The commander asked if this did not mean that they would all die sooner or later, but the old man confirmed his words, after which he said that the killer Azur himself asked for the destruction because he was hoping for something. When the discussion was over, they decided to go to bed early, as they had to leave before dawn. At that time, Chong woke up in the room and quietly got out of bed. As he headed for the door, Han said that it was best to surrender immediately if Li was going to run. But Chong did not understand what he was talking about, because he was not going to run away from there. And he didn't understand why he was running away, but he was just going to the toilet. After completing his business, Chong exited the toilet and quickly began to run back. Suddenly he heard some strange sounds from the other side of the fence. Intrigued, Chong climbed onto it to see what was happening. There was a kid about his age who was training with a sword. The child possessed incredible skill, which was in no way inferior to the skill of experienced professionals. The hood flew up, and before Chong appeared the figure of a boy with unusual hair the color of gray ash and expressive brown eyes. The boy suddenly turned around, felt that someone was watching him. He looked at the mountain, but there was no one there. John had time to go downstairs and heard a conversation. It was the teacher talking about whether they had told this boy that he couldn't go outside now. The boy replied that he had just gone outside to get some fresh air, and the teacher told him to hurry back to his room before he was noticed. But he was very worried about the squad of dead souls. But the teacher calmed him down, saying that it was the adult's business, and it was better to concentrate on training. This boy turned out to be Sogo, and it was he who was the hope of saving the squad of dead souls. At that time, it was very loud in the waiting room because the brothers had a feast. The third brother asked the second brother if he remembered who Shinse-chun was, to which he replied that of course he remembered. Zi-chun was excellent with the dragon sword. And then the second brother asked if he remembered his last words, but he didn't remember because Zi-chun died instantly. After which the third brother said that he said something like a grunt. After which all the brothers began to laugh loudly and carelessly. But after hearing the sounds, they realized that it was time to say goodbye, and the older brother thanked them for the time spent together. After all, thanks to them, he lived a wonderful life, and he hoped that they would all remain alive and return one day. Pain and sadness burst out from the depths of his soul, but the second brother, clenching his teeth, got up from his seat and began to say goodbye. After that, all the brothers rose from their seats and paid their respects to the elder brother. With the inevitability of future changes, it was clear to them that their lives were about to be turned upside down, and this caused an unbearable pain in their hearts. Dawn came, and the commander and his men were already waiting for Azur at the gate of the Dead Soul unit. He began to shout that Azur was the killer of the divine swordsman Kyuchi, came out to them and accepted his punishment. The children began to wake up. They reluctantly opened their eyes, not understanding what was happening. The fifth brother raised a ruckus for the children to wake up immediately and gather. Curiously, Han turned to his older brother to find out why they were gathering so early. The fifth brother replied that there was no time to explain, and he would do it later, but now we had to run. The brothers were already waiting for them, and they began to run quickly to the backyard. Brothers on horses were already waiting in front of them, waving to them and shouting the fifth brother. Then the children began to be seated on horses to their teachers, but they were ordered to hold on as hard as possible so that they would not fall. As soon as everyone was on their horses, the second brother turned to his brothers. He said that they would be better off if they didn't tell each other where they were going, and he hoped that they would all survive and see each other in 10 years. Hearing the words of the second brother, The brothers felt even more alarmed and asked him to be careful. After that, with sadness on their faces, with the understanding that it is not known when they will meet again, they wished each other luck. Hitting the horses, they set off on a long journey. At that time, the elder brother was standing in front of the Namyang subdivision, awaiting his punishment. The commander said that he was the leader of the unit, and he represented the 10 major sects. Calmly and unmoved, Asura replied that he had heard that name often. Asura's composure infuriated the commander, and he angrily asked how Asura dared to kill the divine swordsman Kyuchi, and if he was willing to take responsibility for his actions. Asura replied that he admitted that he had broken the rules of the Central Plains, and that it was not for him to determine the extent of the crime. The commander became even more angry, but spoke so that the people would look at him as he spoke some nonsense before his death, and he wondered how much longer Asura's insolence would last. After that, the commander began to shout where the last brothers were, but Asura answered that they were gone. They had gone away. He didn't know where because he decided to take the punishment himself so that his brothers would have time to escape. The commander thought that Asura did not understand the severity of the punishment, but Asura was aware of everything. With a threat in his voice, the commander warned Asura that any resistance would be futile, and asked if he really thought his brothers would be able to escape from the 10 great sects. With hatred in his eyes, he said that Asura could forget about any hope. Then the commander waved his hand and ordered to prepare everything for punishment. People ran up to Asura, grabbed him and forced him to his knees. Then they began to take off their outer clothes, took out the ropes. They tied his hands and feet tightly with this rope. Unable to hold back, the 4th brother rushed forward, trying to get to Asura. But the commander stopped him and told him not to do stupid things and not to interfere with the execution of the punishment. With contempt in his voice, he ordered the 4th brother to sit quietly, adding with sarcasm that his presence here is very appropriate, because someone will have to clean up after the execution. The humans had almost finished tying Asura with rope, preparing him for a gruesome execution. As they finished their preparations, the realization began to dawn on Asura that his life would end here and now. Facing Asura, the commander began the destruction. The commander ordered them all to obey the order of the Shaolin monk, and he said that life is the most valuable thing in this world, and only heaven has the right to take away the life that was given. For murder, the Shaolin monks will remove the killer's eyes so that he cannot look at this world. Such is the price for a terrible deed, and the killer has only himself to blame. In a fit of brutality, they pounced on Asura, intending to tear out his left eye. Despite the excruciating pain, he didn't make a sound, which was no surprise to the commander. After one eye was cut out, the commander began to read the second punishment. It said that Asura's heart was filled with hatred. The 9 palaces inside it were inhabited by demons, and they invoked the god Tai to drive out the evil entities. The commander continued that let the evil be smitten by the fire of the god of Tai, and it would be right to take Asura's life for his sins. And Asura should be infinitely grateful for the punishment of sight loss. People pounced on him again like predators and began to cut out his second eye, after which the 3rd punishment was pronounced, in which it was said to cut off his right ear. Then the 4th punishment, cutting off the left ear, depriving him of hearing completely. The 5th and 6th punishment deprived him of his left hand. At that time, the brothers fled as fast as possible, farther and farther from their home. And the execution of Asura continued. The 7th and 8th punishments were sounded, in which it was said to deprive him of his legs. Tears rolled down the cheeks of the 2nd brother when he saw this atrocity. His heart was torn by unbearable pain. At that time, the brothers galloped across the field. The horses' hooves pounded the ground. The wind whistled in their ears. And for Asura, the 10th punishment of the beggar sect's decree sounded. And the commander, with hatred in his eyes, said to completely destroy him. At this time, the brothers ran to different sides of the field, away from each other, in different ways. Asura's life was cut short. His blood-spattered body lay limp on the ground. The 5th brother, together with Chong, raced on horseback through the thicket of the forest. Suddenly, 2 people met on their way who made them stop. The 5th brother was indignant because his horse almost knocked them off their feet and asked them to step aside. However, these people, looking exhausted and worn out, explained that they could not retreat from the road because of unbearable hunger and asked for some money to be given to them. The 5th brother threw them a coin and told them to get out of the way. The people thanked and left the road, and the 5th brother and Chong went on. Chong, feeling uneasy, shared his doubts with the 5th brother. Suddenly, raising their heads, these people's expressions suddenly changed to malicious ones, trying to remember where they could have seen these guys. After receiving the announcement that the commander gave them, they realized that it was one of the Red Killers. one of the wanted brothers, and they decided to give a signal and say that one of the members of the squad of dead souls had just passed Mount Oshé. After that, they stuck a signal firework into the ground and tried to light it. Unfortunately, the attempts turned out to be in vain because the armchair got wet and refused to ignite. Suddenly, they heard the sound of hooves, and looking around, they saw the fifth brother, holding a drawn sword in his hand, rushing towards them. With a lightning movement, he struck with his sword, and one of them fell to the ground, covered in blood. This action caused the other to become furious, and he, clenching his fists, prepared to attack the fifth brother. With a firm grip on the weapon in his hand, he yelled for him to stop provoking him immediately. Despite the warning, the fifth brother, without thinking for a second, struck him in the stomach with a sword. After the fifth brother struck and injured the victim, Chong and the fifth brother immediately left for a nearby village. Arriving at the village, they entered one of the buildings, and there they began to wait for the boat to be given to them. The brother asked why Chong does not ask anything. Does he not care what is happening now? Jung replied that if he really needed to know what happened, he would have told him everything himself. The brother was surprised to hear such mature and sensible words from Chong. He said that they were going to flee beyond the central plains, where the 10 great sects would not enter them. Jong asked if they were being chased by people who were more dangerous than the Heavenly Death Sect, to which he replied that they could kill all the members of the Heavenly Sect in one night. Having found themselves in such a dangerous situation, having no other way out, the brothers were forced to become fugitives. Jung said he had a question, and the fifth brother asked what the question was. Embarrassed and smiling, Lee asked how he should address him. The fifth brother turned and stared at Chan in silence. Then he told him to call him teacher, and he would teach him everything he knew if he managed to survive. A happy smile did not leave Chan's face because now he was not alone. Suddenly, an acquaintance of the teacher, who was helping them get the boat, entered the room. The teacher asked if he managed to get the boat, to which the man replied that he did. It would have a yellow knot on it, and it would be easy to find. The teacher thanked him and began to take out the money, but the friend refused to accept it. After all, the teacher took revenge for the death of his parents, and he should thank him. The fifth brother smiled and thanked him for the boat, and his friend asked him to be careful. The teacher said that there was a horse in the yard, and he could take it. And then he called Chong, and they went together to the boat. At that time in Nanyang, the commander of the unit was amazed at how Asura, even when he lost his eyes, ears, arms, and legs, did not make a single sound. He had never seen such a steadfast person before, and he understood that destruction is not easy for the executioner. Even they have a hard time controlling themselves, and it was scary for him to imagine how the one being punished. The commander said that the 10 great sects had chosen him as the executioner, although they doubted that he would be able to see the matter through. His subordinates said that they thought so too, but now they are very proud of their unit leader. Suddenly, one of the subordinates turned to the commander. The commander asked what had happened, to which the subordinate replied that Menman and Ilchin, who were on the approach to Mount Oche, had not yet returned. But the commander reassured him and told him to leave them. He was sure that they fell asleep somewhere halfway. Suddenly, a voice was heard behind them, and they turned to see a crazy black staff. The black staff said indignantly that during such an important process as destruction, the commander should be constantly on guard and check if something went wrong. Everyone present expressed their gratitude to the crazy black staff. Black staff asked why the unit leader was behaving like an ordinary beggar, to which he replied that he still had a lot to learn. The commander wondered what brought the crazy black staff to Nanyang. The black staff thought that he was not welcome here, but the leader assured him that he was not. He then said that after a long discussion, the monks had decided that they would pursue the Raksha's Heaven Sect, Mount Hua, the Invisible Assassins, and the Wu Dan Squad, the Ghostly Watcher. And the squad of beggars will pursue the Red Killers, and the black staff was appointed to be responsible for this difficult and important mission. Hearing this, the people began to rejoice and thank the black staff, and were ready to do whatever he said, and to carry out any of his orders. After the order from the black staff that they should look for the missing from the Oshé Mountains, because there was a possibility of their death, the commander said that he would immediately go there personally. Staff said that if the brothers had already crossed Mount Oche, then their next stop would be Beka, where they were going to hire a boat, in order to organize security around the mountain and recruit as many people as possible in the village of Momol. The commander took all of the black staff's orders into consideration. However, the staff had something else to add, and the commander eagerly awaited what he had to say. And the black staff said that the 10 great sects gave him the opportunity to play the role of the Punisher to fulfill the punishment. because the Nanyang division was the closest to the dead souls, and there was no particular reason. The words of the black staff could not help but upset the commander, however. He restrained his emotions and simply noted that he would know this for the future. At the same time, one of Nanyang's warriors, once a fearless defender of his land, now bent under the weight of hunger, quietly begged for alms in the busy streets of the city, where only yesterday battle cries had been heard. Despite his pleas, people would not give him anything, only passing by, lost in their thoughts, oblivious to his suffering, or irritated by him. Suddenly he turned to the Red Slayer for alms, his voice trembling with tension. But the Red Killer could not help him, apologizing and explaining that there was no way to give him alms now. Sighing heavily and bowing his head, Warrior Nanyang thanked him for his good intentions. Suddenly, his eyes filled with rage and hatred, and he looked in the direction where the Red Assassin had gone, after which he began to wave his hand to his comrades to come to him. He then pointed his finger in the direction of the Red Assassin and Chong, and said that this was the assassin that everyone was looking for right now. He said that Yoongae will report the incident to the unit commander, and the other immediately follows him in pursuit of the Red Assassin. Saying that he needed to catch the Red Killer, he grabbed a huge knife from the fishmonger's table. Together with his friend, he rushed to run on the trail of the Red Killer and calmed down the fisherman, promising that he would soon return the knife. Pushing through the crowd, they searched for him, confident that he couldn't have gone far. And in one of the dark alleys, they managed to spot Chon, and without wasting time, they rushed after him. Having reached the end of the alley, they lurked around the corner, waiting for the right moment to attack. After counting to 3, they jumped into this alley, but there was only a small boy standing in front of them. They began to ask Chong where his teacher had gone, but he only kept silent in response. In response to their actions, without saying a word, Chong held up his index finger, pointing back. Looking up, they saw the 5th brother jumping from the roof straight at them. The 5th brother jumped from the roof, hitting one of them on the head with his elbow. Overcome with rage, the second rushed at him with a knife, seeking to inflict a fatal blow. But with incredible speed, the 5th brother managed to parry the blow and knock the knife out of the attacker's hands. Grabbing the knife from his hands, he struck a hard blow to the body, causing a deep wound. He grabbed the second assailant by the hair and held the blade of the knife to his throat while Zhang watched what was happening. Zhang was silent, not saying a word, his gaze fixed on what was happening. When the teacher dealt with the attackers, he said that they should hurry, because the group of beggars began to move. At that time, a group of beggars were already at the port of departure of the boats, and were looking for the 5th brother, scrutinizing everyone's face. Zhang and the teacher watched what was happening in one of the houses, and the teacher said that they should have been a little faster, because now it would be difficult to fight them off and get to the boat. And the teacher decided that it was better for them to sit in the shelter for a while. He hoped that later they would slow down their search. Suddenly, through the window, they saw one of the group of beggars. Noticing them, the beggar turned and began to stare intently in their direction. At that time, in one of the alleys, the beggars discovered the bodies of their brothers, who were brutally killed by the 5th brother. Looking at their wounds, they concluded that it was the work of professionals, and they were sure that it was the Red Assassin. Suddenly, one of the commander's subordinates started running to them with the news that they had found Menman and Ilchin on Mount Oche. The commander was sure that they simply fell asleep on the way, but the subordinate denied the commander's assumptions. With pity in his eyes, he said that the 2 of them had been found dead. The commander couldn't stand it, and out of anger hit the wall with his fist, cursing the Red Killer. And the black staff said that they were going from Mount Oche to Baeka Harbor to swim. There was no time to be indignant. The Red Killer had driven himself into a cage with such actions, and he ordered the black staff to gather everyone in order to find him. The commander and his subordinates obeyed the order and set off. At that time, the beggar who noticed Chan and the teacher stood and just silently looked at them. He turned away, scratched his head, and walked away from them without saying a word. The teacher thought it was suspicious, so he came out of the vault, trying not to make any noise, and gave chase. The teacher quickened his pace to catch up with him, and a sudden fear gripped the beggar as he realized that the teacher was following him. The beggar ran away, shouting loudly that the Red Killer was chasing him. When the beggar was already close, the Red Killer began to take out the sword from the scabbard. Taking out the sword from the scabbard, the teacher did not find the beggar in sight, because he had already run away around the corner. Wasting no time, the teacher rushed back to Chong. Approaching Chan, the teacher shouted loudly for him to run back as fast as possible. After that, he said that they had found them, and the other members of the Nanyang Association would follow them. Without hesitation, they quickly ran into the thick of the forest, escaping from their pursuers. All that could be heard were the shouts of those chasing after them, ordering the red assassin to be captured immediately. And the teacher and Chong realized that the boat escape was being cancelled. At that time, the beggar who had seen Chan and the red killer came to his squad and told everything he knew, after which the commander began to kick him. The commander blamed him for not pursuing the red assassin instead of running away from him. The black staff intervened to stop him and calm him down. He said that the beggar is not guilty because it is impossible to deal with the killer of dead souls on your own. After that, the black staff asked the beggar if he saw anything unusual. More details were needed, but the beggar does not see anything special. But he only noticed that the murderer was not hiding alone. There was a little boy with him. After these words, the black staff began to laugh loudly, but no one could understand why. The commander did not understand why they took the children, because it is difficult for them to cope with running alone. Why bother themselves, putting extra time on their shoulders? To which the black staff replied that people do not make the best decisions based on emotions. There are many similar examples throughout the history of mankind. Because of his greed, the killer Asur put his brothers in danger. The slayer Asura and a girl named Yun Yun had a child, and this child was an obstacle for Yun Yun to become the concubine of the divine swordsman Kyuchi. And that's why the killer Asur took this child for himself. He chose execution, and asked his brothers to take the children with him, most likely to protect that child. Blackstaff was sure that among these children was Yun Yun's child, and if these children survived, they would grow up and live for revenge, and they must kill the children so that in the future the children would not kill them. Therefore, he ordered the beggars to find brothers and children who would be with them at any cost and quickly. At that time, to avoid danger, John and the teacher hid in the thick of the forest, hiding under the branches of the trees. The reader said that they must go immediately because they urgently need food, because they are very hungry after a long and tiring day. He thought that they had better somehow distract the boys from the Nanyang detachment, and in the morning the village of Momol would already be completely in their hands. Making their way through the thickets of the forest, they noticed the huts, from the windows of which there was a bright glow. Approaching one of them, the teacher knocked on the door and asked for a little food, and he would not be in debt. The door opened a little, and a grandmother looked out of it, who said that she had almost nothing, and why they should not ask someone from the village of Momol. The teacher said they were too hungry to go there now and handed her the money. Rejoicing at the unexpected wealth, the grandmother hastily let them into the house. To treat her unexpected guests, the grandmother put 4 pies on the table, after which she said that she warned that she had nothing to give, but the teacher and Jeon thanked her. They wished each other good luck and immersed themselves in the delicious treat, and the grandmother, not hiding her smile, went to the kitchen. Chong, grabbing a pie from the plate, asked the teacher, "They can't go back to Momol." The teacher was shocked by such a question, but Lee thought it would be a bad idea to go back there when everyone was standing on their ears. And it seems that they had no choice but to continue their journey through the mountains, and the grandmother, hearing their conversation, was stunned. The teacher, looking at Chong in surprise, could not believe his ears, because lies flowed from the boy's lips as easily as breath. Suddenly, there was a loud knocking at the door. The grandmother was indignant that everyone could not come to her at night, and grumblingly went to open the door. There was a commotion outside the door, accompanied by shouts that they had arrived from the Nanyang detachment. Opening the door, the grandmother asked what had brought the people from the Nanyang detachment here, even at such a time. The grandmothers began to show the portrait of the teacher, and these people from the Nanyang ward accused him of killing many people. After realizing who was depicted in the portrait, the grandmother became numb. Tingles ran over her body, and her heart beat at a frantic speed. Jean, realizing the complexity of the situation, addressed this grandmother as his own, pretending that they were a real family, and he addressed the teacher as if he were his father and asked to give him more pies. The teacher, having understood Lee's plan, played along with him. The people from the Nanyang detachment, with a fierce look, asked the grandmother again with the same question, whether she had ever seen the person depicted in the portrait. Averting her eyes to the side and with a trembling voice, the grandmother mumbled that she could not remember if she had ever met this person. Not getting a clear answer, the men from the Nanyang squad forcefully began to open the door. Having crossed the threshold, one of them smelled an unpleasant smell, and the grandmother was extremely frightened at that time. With a tremor in her voice, the grandmother denied that she did not understand what was being said, but he became angry, not believing her words, and declared that the grandmother could not help smelling this. With a fierce look, he stared at the grandmother and said, "Did she think that they would not smell the pies?" Entering the room, they found a small boy sitting at the table. Approaching the boy, they greeted him, to which Chong replied in a friendly manner. One of them took a quick look at the kitchen and saw the teacher there, standing with his back to them, busy preparing food. He turned to the teacher, saying that they were very lucky to have a grandmother who bakes such delicious cakes for them. And the teacher replied that they sincerely thanked fate for giving them such a wonderful grandmother. He asked the teacher to share the pies with them, to which the teacher replied with a sly smile that of course they could treat them. But it is unlikely that they would like such a treat. After the teacher's suspicious words, the warrior from Nanyang reached for his sword to deliver a surprise blow. But the teacher was faster. He managed to overtake the warrior and gave him a fatal blow to the neck with a knife. After witnessing the brutal massacre of their comrade, the Nanyang warriors who accompanied him immediately drew their swords and rushed at the teacher. Despite the numerical advantage, the teacher proved to be incredibly agile. He quickly repelled the attacks of the warriors and dealt them devastating blows in return. The teacher rushed at one of the soldiers with a knife, but he, showing a quick reaction, managed to dodge the blow. After that, he gave the warrior a powerful kick in the stomach, throwing him to the middle of the room. Another warrior, armed with a massive knife, jumped out from the corner of the room, rushing at the teacher to save his comrade. Despite the sudden and unexpected attack, the teacher was able to react swiftly and masterfully, instantly dodging and blocking the powerful blow, demonstrating his excellent martial arts skills. In response to the attack, he delivered a powerful and accurate elbow strike to the opponent's face in a flash. Not allowing the soldier to regain consciousness, he swung and stabbed him in the head with a knife. One of these warriors took Chon by the head and held a knife to his throat, and began to threaten that if the fifth brother did not stop, he would kill the boy. Before he could finish, the teacher hit him in the head with another knife. Having lost consciousness, he fell to the ground, and the second immediately rushed at the fifth brother. Not lost, the fifth brother grabbed him by the hand and forcefully threw him over his shoulder to the floor. Holding his hand, the teacher snatched a huge knife from his hands, swung it, and struck a fatal blow. The gruesome killings shocked the last warriors as well. They were horrified when they saw the rivers of blood spilling around them. The fifth brother looked up. His gaze, full of rage and cold cruelty, was such that the frost ran through his skin. Overwhelmed with terror, one of them ran away, exclaiming that he would immediately report to the commander what had happened. Terror gripped the second warrior as well, and he, trembling, quickly asked his comrade to wait for him, in order to escape together from the dangerous enemy, who turned out to be much stronger than they expected. Before he could take a step, he was pierced with a knife by the fifth brother. With a quick movement, the fifth brother grabbed a knife and threw it at the fleeing man, who intended to inform the commander, but the blade hit a strong tree trunk. After that, the teacher threw another knife in the direction of the fugitive, but this time he purposefully hit his head, and the warrior flew a couple of meters and fell to the ground. At that time, the atmosphere of horror and death reigned in the house. Bloodied bodies were lying everywhere. Some of them were still wheezing, letting out their last breaths. Fear paralyzed the grandmother. Her body trembled and her face was pale. She sat in the corner, unable to say a single word, only silently watching the terrible scene. Seeing the frightened grandmother, Chong approached her and, looking into her eyes, said that everything was over and they would not harm her. Just then, a bloodied teacher entered the room and told Chong that they should leave as soon as possible. There was an oppressive silence in the room, which was broken only by the sound of rustling things. The teacher and Chong gathered their things without uttering a single word. Looking back, the teacher thanked him for the pies, after which he and John left. Fear gripped the grandmother's chest, preventing her from uttering a single word. Her eyes, wide open with terror, saw off the people who were leaving, and unbearable pain grew in her soul. The next day, soldiers from the Nanyang detachment came to her and began to question the grandmother about everything that had happened. But she did not know much, only about the boat, that they would not return to the village of Momol, and he also thanked her for the food. After which, summoning all their courage, they quickly picked up the bodies of their fallen comrades, carefully carried them, and hastily retreated to their safe territory to pay their respects to the fallen. Black Staff, filled with rage, said that they were losing too much in this pursuit of the killer. The commander said that if the grandmother is to be believed, then the fifth brother is not going to return to Momol, to which the Black Staff replied that he surely thinks that they will believe this lie. The commander said that the fifth brother clearly underestimated them, but the Black Staff did not believe the words of the fifth brother, He believed that he could deceive to disguise his true plans, and therefore ordered them to separate and go to Momol, and said that even if he managed to deceive them, he clearly underestimated their number. After that, they immediately went to the village of Momol, and the commander of the unit was ordered to go to Nanyang as soon as possible. At that time, the teacher and Chong were sitting on the roof of one of the houses and watching the situation in the village. The teacher said that even if the number of Nanyang people decreased, it did not mean that they could walk around peacefully, and he decided that it was better to wait for the night. And since there was nothing for them to do, he suggested that they sleep. Watching the clouds float across the calm sky, the teacher couldn't help but worry about whether his brothers were all right. Suddenly, sudden screams coming from below made Chong start to descend from the roof to see what was going on. Once at the edge of the roof, Chong saw the boy, without holding back his anger, express his grievances to the girl who did not share his feelings. Overcome with rage, the boy uttered terrible threats, and the girl begged him for mercy. The teacher told Chong not to worry about them, as they were in no position to help others. But when he raised his head, he did not find Chong next to him. Meanwhile, Chong, who had come down from the roof, started shouting loudly at the boy who was trying to harm the girl, trying to stop him. In a resolute voice, he threatened that if he did not stop, he would immediately report everything to the authorities. But the boy, not paying attention to the threats, began to threaten Chong in response that if he did not leave and leave them alone, then he would get even with him. Suddenly, a teacher appeared behind him, who in a stern voice addressed the boy and advised him to listen to Chong's words. Feeling the gaze of the teacher standing behind Chong, the boy was filled with real terror. The teacher said that Chong should not go anywhere without being asked, even if someone dies. But Chong did not understand his words, because he helped people himself. But the teacher replied that it was not help, but he just received money for it and did his job. At that time, the boy crawled closer to the knife and took it in his hands. Grabbing a knife, the boy aggressively pointed it at the teacher, but the teacher, in order not to inflame the situation even more, tried to calm the boy down. Chong shouted to the girl to run away from there now and quickly. The girl, seized with terror, jumped up and ran away from the boy. Even though she was running away, the boy wasn't going to let her go. He reached out his arms to grab her. With a strong blow of the shoulder, the fifth brother stopped the boy, not giving him a chance to grab her. The force of the impact was such that the boy flew away and knocked off the cabinets with dishes, which crashed on the floor with a thud. Seizing the opportunity, the girl ran away, and the fifth brother meanwhile approached the boy. He sternly warned the boy that if he dared to threaten the girl again, he would immediately report him to the authorities. Fear suddenly gripped the boy. His face turned pale, and his eyes widened in horror, recognizing the man from the wanted poster on the pier in the fifth brother. He realized that the murderer was standing before him. The face of the fifth brother immediately changed. How wrong this boy was to recognize him. There were indeed photos of the teacher and Chong on the wanted board attached to the pier, confirming the boy's words. Meanwhile, the wharf itself was bustling with life, ships plying to and fro, loading and unloading goods. Suddenly, a loud cry rang out from one of the soldiers of the Nanyang detachment. Holding a plate of food in his hands, he happily called his comrades to come to him. When they approached him, he said that he had brought them dumplings, and his companions were happy to hear this. After all, they were dying of hunger. They needed more energy in order to catch the Red Killer. Suddenly, there was a loud cry calling for a person named Lee Sam, and it made the people of Nanyang wonder, because they did not understand who he was addressing. There was a man standing behind them, to whom a shout was heard, but he did not respond to it in any way. The man who called Lee Sam pointed to the ship and asked what he was doing as they were about to sail. There was still a lot to be loaded onto the ship, and he wondered how much longer Lee Sam would be melting and ordered him to speed up. The man's unusual behavior alarmed the people of Nanyang, who watched his every move with suspicion. Lee Sam, waving his hand, grunted with displeasure that he would appear now and began to speak angrily about the commanders. After Lee Sam left, the people of Nanyang began to discuss the terrible news of the 6 deaths on Dongha Mountain. They were convinced that it was the handiwork of a Red Killer. After some time, all the goods were loaded onto the ship. The commander reported to his superiors about the completion of loading and readiness for departure. Wasting no time, the ship's crew set to work to hoist the sails and remove the vessel from the anchor. As soon as the anchor was raised and the sails unfurled, the ship set out on its journey. While setting sail, one of the crew members asked Lee Sam what kind of huge bag he was carrying. Lee Sam replied that it was just a friend's request to move his things, to which the man said that he thought the bag had moved. With a calm expression on his face, Lee Sam announced that there were 30 vipers in the bag. Upon hearing this, the man jumped away from the bag in terror. After that, he immediately informed the ship's boss that Lee Sam was carrying a viper with him, to which he started apologizing, explaining that they were just his friend's belongings, who had asked him to move them. The boss ordered that it be moved to a more secure place, where it would not be accidentally opened. At that time, on the shore, one of Nanyang's warriors was resting in the shade of a tree. Suddenly, someone slapped him on the nose, making him wake up. Opening his eyes, he noticed a black staff in front of him, which said that if it was a red killer, then he would not be breathing anymore. The black staff was indignant as the warrior slept soundly in the middle of the day, oblivious to the dire situation they found themselves in. Throwing himself on his knees, the warrior began to beg for forgiveness, but in response he heard that they had already lost 10 fighters and that he should immediately control himself. Suddenly, one of the soldiers appeared, who breathlessly shouted about the red killer. Black Staff coldly asked who was the victim this time. The warrior said that this person was not from Nanyang, and the Black Staff should personally examine the body. While on the ship's deck, Lee Sama's comrade offered him a drink. Unexpectedly for his friend, Lee Sam refused the offer. Lee Sam reassured his friend, saying that he just had a bit of a headache after yesterday's wine, to which the friend remarked that he shouldn't have drunk so much, because age takes its toll. Having taken a sip of tart wine, the friend inquired about the course of his affairs. Not understanding exactly what matters were being discussed, Lee Sam heard the laughter of his friend in response, who advised him not to act like a fool. With a sly smile, the friend whispered, "Was he the one making all the fuss in order to gain Sun Hua's favor?" After again inquiring about the development of events, the friend received a request from Lee Sam to forget about it. Taking another sip of wine, the friend realized that Lee Sam had been rejected again, and muttered in frustration that he knew it. He said that he knew the reason for his failures, and abruptly fell silent. A sudden terror gripped his face, his eyes widened and filled with unimaginable horror. Surprised, Lee Sam asked what happened to his face. He touched his face with his hand, and suddenly the skin on his cheek began to peel off. Suddenly, the friend received a strong blow on the neck with his hand, and after a strong blow, he fainted and fell to the ground. Tearing off the skin of Lee Sam's face in disgust, the face of the fifth brother appeared beneath it. After which he said that he was in a hurry, so it did not stick well, and threw the skin into the sea. At that time, Lee Sam's faceless body was discovered at the wharf from where the ship departed. When the Black Staff saw this horror, he was shocked, and could not even think that the Red Killer was also a master at making human masks. Confused, he asked if anyone knew this person, and was told that according to the old man, he worked on a transport ship. The old man was sure of this because only he had a mole on his palm. After speaking with the old man, the Black Staff ordered to immediately stop the ship Brave Cargo, which was docked at Becca Harbor. One of the soldiers said that they say this ship is stopping at Nanyang Pier. Black Staff said that sending the commander from the unit to Nanyang was the right decision. After that, he ordered to fire a flare and send a carrier pigeon, thereby instructing the unit commander to stop Brave Cargo at the docks. Having fired a rocket into the sky, the unit commander should have arrived at the pier before Brave. This signal rocket shot was visible from the ship. The fifth brother, who was hiding friend Lee Sam's body, couldn't help but notice this flare. He understood that they would be waiting for them in Nanyang, and began to open the box where Chong was. Opening the box, he saw Chong asleep and told him to get out of there. John asked if they were safe, and the teacher asked if he could swim, to which Lee replied that he had not tried yet. And taking him in his arms, the teacher said that today is the day when it is worth trying. After that, the teacher threw Chong into the open sea with all his might. Without losing a moment, the fifth brother pushed himself away from the ship and jumped after him. At this time, the ship Brave Cargo had already docked at the port of Nanyang. After the anchors were lowered and the sails were removed from the side, a wooden bridge was installed for the transition to the port. The Nanyang warriors began to board the ship and shout for everyone to stay in their places, and whoever dared to get off the ship without permission to be blamed. Having started the search, they rushed around the ship, not missing a single cabin. With rapt attention, they peered into the faces of each crew member, not missing a single detail. With anger in his voice, the captain, who heard the commotion on the ship, went on deck and asked how they dared to step on board without permission. The commander of the Nanyang unit said that there was a red assassin hiding on board this vessel, but the captain did not understand what he was talking about. This was an emergency, and the unit commander hoped that the ship's captain understood that he could not request permission in advance. The commander ordered to show the crew and the captain a portrait of the killer, to which the captain said that if this was the person he was thinking about, Then they were too late. Taking out the portrait, they showed it to everyone present and to the captain, and asked if any of them had seen this person. The captain said that he did not personally, and besides, it was difficult to answer from a portrait, after which he pointed his finger into the distance of the ocean, and he said that about an hour ago he had thrown the child overboard, and then he had jumped himself, and probably he had succeeded in reaching that shore. The commander of the unit began to threaten the captain that if he helped the Red Killer, he would be punished with 10 lashes. The captain turned to one of the crew who had been hit in the neck and asked what he had seen, to which he replied that the man was not Lee Sam. He was just wearing a mask of Lee Sam's face, and his voice sounded very strange. The commander was angry because the Red Killer was very close, and they could not catch him. At this time, having gathered the last strength, the fifth brother and Chong reached the other shore. The teacher came out of the water and put the unconscious Chan on the ground. With one hand, he started CPR on John, who was choking on seawater. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing came out. Chong wasn't breathing, and his lips were cold. Despondent, he sat silently next to the little boy's body. After sitting for a few minutes near Chan, gathering his strength, the teacher got up and ran away. Suddenly, he heard a cough behind him. His body shuddered, and he turned to see Jung coughing. He could not believe his eyes. With a pale face and dull eyes, Chong asked the teacher to believe that he had learned to swim because he had miraculously survived. Surprise and joy filled the teacher at the same time when he learned that Jong had survived, and he couldn't help but smile. The elder and the last warriors were making their way to the other shore. Arriving at the shore, they were met there by other soldiers of the unit commander. When the elder came down to land, he said that the red assassin was escaping from the transport ship Brave Cargo. The commander said that it looked like the ship's captain wasn't lying, but the elder wasn't sure about that. After that, the commander asked the elder to look at the sand. On the sand was the vomit of the child lying there, and it seems that they did not notice that they left traces. The elder was interested in where they were going now, to which the commander replied that they were going to Wanyan, and if they got to Wanyan, it would be more difficult to find them, and they would have to expand their search to Guchen, Hubu, Lushan, and Duachan, and the Nanyang warriors were bound to catch them in Wanyan, and they went there without losing a moment. One of the warriors suggested that if he wanted to get to Wanyan, he would have to go along the main road, and now that his face was known, he would not take that route. He is easy to recognize, unless he hides his face again with a mask, or if there is no place where he does not need to hide his face. After exchanging glances with this warrior, the elder assumed that this was a cemetery. The warrior confirmed this assumption. The elder asked the commander which of the Nanyang Mountains used to be a cemetery, to which he began to argue that if they wanted to catch the Red Killer, they should continue on their way without stopping. He thought that they would just be wasting their time if they searched the cemetery, but the elder didn't want to hear anything and asked again which of the mountains used to be the cemetery. The commander replied that Tianyin Mountain and Huangcheng Mountain, the difference between them, is that Tianyin is for wealthy people and Huangcheng is for poor people. The elder ordered the commander to go to Tianyin Mountain, and he himself would go to Huangcheng Mountain, and warned that if he noticed him, then their pursuit would be over. He just had to watch and wait for the elder's order. The commander agreed with this order, and they set off. One of the soldiers, glancing at the commander, couldn't hold back a sly smile. During the journey, the commander said that he looked at him with disgust and with a sly smile, and was angry about it. One of them began to apologize to the commander, but the commander only asked him to do so. If Red were a killer, he'd be removing faces from the dead on one of the mountains, or not wasting time trying to get out of this place. To which he replied that he would run away without looking back, and how could he steal someone's face? The commander said that it was obvious, and was convinced that the elder was wrong. After some time, they reached the Tianyin cemetery. One of the soldiers offered to surround the mountain, to which the commander replied that there was no need, because he was sure that there was no Red Killer here. After which they found a place, and the commander ordered everyone to rest, because they would soon have to run with all their legs again. The tired soldiers obeyed the order, sat down on the grass to rest. One of the warriors said that right now, they were defending the justice of the Central Plains, and how could anyone complain? To which the other replied that it was difficult not only for the man on the run, but also for his pursuer. Another thought it was an emergency, and he hoped they understood why he couldn't make the request for permission sooner, while another began shouting that some were not happy with the order of 10 lashes. But he closed his mouth and told him not to shout, that he understood everything, and he said that the world is becoming more illegal. There are more people who only care about their own skin, just like him. One of the soldiers who was lying on the grass said that his words were true, but they did not sound very good, and asked someone to hit him for him. One of them agreed and hit him on the head with all his might. Due to such a strong impact, it flew down into the pit that was behind them. He fell to the ground with a force, hitting his back against a pile of stones. The one who pushed him began to apologize because he did not expect such a strong fall. Getting up, he began to shout that as soon as he got out of the hole, he would give him a scratch. Turning to the other side, he saw the red assassin and Chong in the bushes. The red assassin reacted quickly, taking out his knife and placing the blade against his neck. Ta began to look at him intently, and Little John only made a gesture to be quieter, after which he said that if the warrior only took one step, his head would be separated from his body. The warrior caught his breath. He did not know what to do in such a difficult situation. Cold sweat began to flow down his face. At this time, the soldiers together with the elder went to the Huangcheng cemetery and began to dig up the graves, looking for traces of the Red Killer. But when they dug them up, they saw that not one of these corpses was untouched. They wondered if the Red Killer felt guilty. Digging more and more graves, they could not understand why not one of them was untouched. The elders said that since there were poor people buried in this cemetery, they probably died of starvation, and their faces didn't fit. Then he probably dug a few graves, assessed the contents, and left. At the same moment, he ordered the commander of the unit to fire flares so that they would surround the mountain so that no mouse would escape. But the problem was that they forgot the flares. The elder got angry at such irresponsibility on their part. One of them said that he himself would quickly reach them and inform the commander. The elder said that sunset was near, and he had to hurry. At that time, at the Tianyin cemetery, everyone began to worry about the whereabouts of the soldier who fell from the mountain, and why he was silent. And he was sitting with a blade at his throat from a red assassin who ordered him to answer something. He said that at least one extra word from his mouth he would be killed immediately. After listening to him, the warrior said that everything is fine with him and there is no reason to worry. He was told that if everything is fine, then let him climb back up the mountain. Chong came up with a plan, took off his paw, and he started pointing his finger at his paw. The warrior understood Chong's plan and said that he had lost his paw and there was no way he could find it. To which he was told that he should search more thoroughly because the paw could not run away anywhere and was lying somewhere nearby. The commander stood up and shouted for them to set off immediately, but the soldiers did not understand what had happened. After all, the elder can send a letter, but he didn't want to hear anything and ordered to go to Wanyang right away and ask the boy who lost his foot to stay here. They warned Kwang-o that they would go to Wanyang, and he stays here. If he receives a letter from the elder, deliver it to them. And they are counting on him. And Kwang-o didn't know what to do, whether to say that the Red Killer is here or to survive. But still, gathering all his will into a fist, he tried to shout that the enemy was here. Before he could say anything, the red assassin cut off his head with lightning speed with one wave of his hand. One of the soldiers noticed some sounds from the pit, but he attached great importance to it and went on. They also told him not to waste time in this place, and they set off, but he was already dead. Fifth brother and Chong sat in the bushes and waited for the warriors from Nanyang to leave. When the warriors left, the teacher and John went to the tombs in the cemetery. Chong said that they didn't just overtake them, they overtook them, to which the teacher replied that he had been thinking about how to get them down from Chenyin Mountain. But now the plans had changed. All they have to do is wait until they go away. Chong asked if the teacher will continue to make human masks, to which he replied that there was no reason to make them now, but Chong curiously asked if he could inspect the graves as well. The teacher wondered if Chong could do them, but he only remembered the teacher doing it on Mount Huangcheng, after which the teacher allowed him to try. Chong ran to the graves with joy and great enthusiasm, shouting that he was the first. At that time, one of the soldiers was riding a horse to the commander at the Tianyin cemetery, but when he arrived there, he found no one there, neither soldiers nor the commander himself. He was angry. Did the commander go to Wanyang after all? Without losing a moment of his time, he quickly followed in the footsteps of the commander. At that time, Chong and the teacher were looking for graves. At first, the teacher said to follow the smell of dirt. The plants have only recently been watered, so they are full of life. Unlike Huangcheng Mountain, Tianyin Mountain has a lot of green grass, although the graves are quite fresh, and Chong pointed to one pile of grass and asked if that was what they were looking for. With a smile, the teacher said that he had praised him, and Chong asked why there were so many graves in this cemetery. It would take a long time to dig them up, but he promised to try his best. The teacher said that there was no need, as they could get inside without digging them up, but Chong didn't understand the teacher's words. With the intention of moving, the teacher leaned on the monument and began to push it with all his might. Suddenly, at the place of the shifted monument, a dark pit appeared in its place, leading somewhere deep into the earth. With a crackling torch in hand, they stepped onto the first step of the dark tunnel. In the depths of the tunnel, a massive coffin, decorated with intricate patterns, opened to them. At that time, the soldiers together with the commander ran to Wanyang in order to capture the Red Killer. Suddenly, screams were heard behind them, begging them to stop. Looking around, they saw one of Nanyang's warriors who had come on horseback to deliver a message from the elder. He began to shout where the commander was going, to which he replied that they were in a hurry to catch the Red Killer, after which the warrior began to shout that the elder had ordered to wait at the Tianyin Mountains, to which the commander replied that he had no choice but to go on, because they might lose such a chance to catch the Red Killer. What he was indignant about, because the responsibility for the destruction of the Red Killer rests entirely on the elder, and he does not decide anything here. But it was not the time to find out who was right and who was guilty, so they need to return to Tianyin Mountain right now. The commander ordered the soldiers to turn around and return to Tianyin Mountain. The warrior asked why the commander did not leave anyone behind to convey the message to him in case something happened, but the commander denied and said that he had left his own man there. But the warrior said that he had just been near the mountain and there was no one there. The commander's eyes filled with horror. His heart began to beat harder. Did the red assassin kill one of his men again? At this time, the fifth brother was showing Chong how to make a human mask. The teacher asked if Chong was disgusted, but Chong replied that he was. But then the teacher didn't understand why he kept watching then. Chong spoke up. Isn't that something he should learn? He was trying to figure out how to remove the skin without damaging it. The teacher didn't know what to say, so he just looked at Chong with a smile. Suddenly, they heard a cry calling for the warrior whom the teacher had killed today. Running out into the street, he tried to understand how close the soldiers were, and how many there were. At this time, the Nanyang soldiers found Kwang O's body and reported it to the commander. The commander quickly ran and asked where he was now, after which he was shown the dead body of Kwang O. The commander began to blame himself for his death. He believed that it was because of him that he was killed. The elder said, "Does he now understand what happens when he acts without thinking? The death is another proof that the Red Killer is really here. They couldn't let Kwang O give his life in vain." He told the commander that it was necessary to surround Tianyin Mountain and search the entire mountain climbing area. While the commander did not hear what was happening around him, he was lost in his thoughts. The elder shouted how much longer the commander would be immersed in his thoughts. The commander was frightened. His eyes widened, and cold sweat began to flow from his forehead. He said that he did not, and he would strictly follow the elder's orders. The elder ordered the flares to be launched, and if they escaped from Tianyin Mountain, then gather followers from Lushan, Guchen, Hubu, and Wanyang. After that, the Nanyang warriors quickly went to surround Tianyin Mountain. The commander started shouting for everyone except the district group to start searching the mountain, unless they forget that their target is an assassin, a master of disguise, and they need to search everything thoroughly, every area over and over again. Like a giant ring of fire, the torches encircled the mountain, illuminating its slopes in the darkness of the night. Stupor gripped the teacher. He could not believe his eyes and did not know how to react to what was happening and what to do. The teacher said that it was his mistake. He did not think that they could return. John started to go downstairs again, saying that he would take their things now, but the teacher stopped him. Seeing the mountain surrounded by torches, the teacher began to lose hope. He realized that they were surrounded from all sides and could not escape. Before John could say anything, the teacher told him to go back down into the tomb. After that, he began to push the monument again with all his might in order to close the entrances to them. After all, this was the only option. If they could not escape, then they could only hide. From the inside, the teacher blocked all the entrances. In order to at least delay them, they hid in a tomb that belonged to Judge Bao Xiao Xiao. At this time, the warriors from Nanyang continued to search every inch of the mountain in search of the Red Killer. The elder approached the commander and asked if they had found at least something, to which he replied that he was sure that they had not missed anything, because they had searched every centimeter on the mountain, and asked why the tombs on this mountain are so big, to which the elder replied that Tianyin Mountain is famous for being more favorable for burials. Many wealthy people built these tombs, competing with each other, and the elder said that they were big enough to fit both a dead and a living person. After these words, it dawned on the commander. He realized what the elder meant, and he, without losing a single moment of time, ordered to search everything again. But the elder asked if he really intended to dig up all the graves, to which he replied that of course the number is not important, The elder, of course, praised him. But a rotting corpse will not suit a murderer who makes human masks. After that, he ordered to immediately bring him the caretaker of the Tianyin Mountain Cemetery. At this time, the fifth brother was thinking about what to do next, because they should have run without looking back, and not come back here for a human mask. If they were to get to Wanyan, it would be easier to escape from them. But they were in such a hurry that there was simply no other choice but this tomb, and it was only a matter of time before they were found. Despair gripped the teacher's heart. He realized that they could not escape from this burning trap. And this was their last day. Chong asked if the teacher was going to remove the rest of the face to make the masks, but he just looked at Chong without answering. After that, he said that Chong is very capable for his age, and most likely understands their situation, and they don't need masks anymore. Chong replied that when he was almost killed, he was saved by his teacher, and even after he almost choked on the spring water, he is still alive. Therefore, until death itself comes for him, Chong is not going to give up. Chong's determination impressed the teacher. He said that he was clearly superior to the teacher in this. At that time, a caretaker of the graves was brought to the elder, who said that the soldiers of Nanyang were like a swarm. The caretaker began to be taken to the cemetery to the elder. The elder asked the caretaker if he had been enlightened about the case, to which he replied that he had been told that they were looking for a murderer. After that, the elder asked who was buried here for the last time, and the caretaker showed the graves that were buried 3 days ago, 5 days ago, and 10 days ago. But the elder interrupted him and asked them to take them to the nearest burial, which was done in the last 2 weeks. And he led them to the grave of Bao Xiaoqiao, a follower of the Luzhou bureaucrat who had been buried 3 days ago. He was 70 years old, but despite his age, even after he died, his skin was full of life, and it was hard to tell whether he was dead or alive. The caretaker asked why the elder was not surprised by Bao Xiao's tombstone, since it cost 30 silver liang. From the outside, it is not at all like that. But if you look at the interior of the tomb, he will not even be surprised if there is money there. Despite the caretaker's interesting stories, the elder asked him to shut up. After that, he asked about the passage to get into the tomb, to which the caretaker replied that the entrance is under the tombstone. It can be moved by 3 strong men. The caretaker wanted to continue the excursion to the grave, which is located halfway to the mountain slope, but the elder stopped him. The grass near the tombstone was wrinkled, which alarmed the elder. Immediately, his expression changed, his eyes filled with joy and hatred at the same time. After all, he was sure that the Red Killer was hiding under them. They immediately began to move the tombstone, and the elder ordered them to be on the lookout, because the Red Assassin would surely be waiting to surprise them. The warriors became alert and began to draw their swords, preparing to attack. Those who moved the tombstone opened it, and a tunnel leading to the tomb opened in front of them. The commander lit a torch and said that he would go down and inspect everything. One of the soldiers called him and threw him a weapon in case of an attack. The commander grabbed his weapon and began to descend into the tomb. He walked cautiously, on guard, because it was not known what other surprise the Red Killer had prepared. But when he entered the middle of the tomb, he was shocked by what he saw. He looked back towards the exit and started calling the elder because he needed to see it for himself. The elder began to descend and asked if there was a Red Killer there. But when he went down, he saw no one, only 3 dug tunnels. No one could imagine how it was possible to dig 3 tunnels, even so deep, in a short period of time. The elder said they were trying their best to survive, and it was a pretty desperate move. But the commander still did not understand why there were 3 tunnels, to which the elder replied that the Red Killer knew they were coming and just wanted to confuse them. After that, the commander began to climb into the tunnel because he wanted to grab him by the tail. And when he began to climb into one of the tunnels, the commander began to shout that there was a dead end. The elder said that they had most likely changed direction and told him to look around. After inspecting all the tunnels, they realized that there are dead ends in all 3 tunnels. The elder said that they dig tunnels and then bury the passage behind them, but the warriors did not believe that this was possible. To which the elder replied that when a person is cornered, he does not think whether it is possible or not, but simply does it. But they could not allow the Red Killer to do whatever he wanted. The elder gritted his teeth, then ran to the exit and began to shout how much gunpowder was left in them, and ordered to bring him every ounce of gunpowder there. When the soldiers began to ask why they needed so much gunpowder, the elder said that there was no time to explain and ordered to bring it immediately. The soldiers quickly went to carry out the elder's order, and he himself began to count something. He was walking in their likely direction, where they were digging a tunnel. He took small steps, already counting to 19. Then, having taken the 20th step, he stopped abruptly and he said that if the tunnel is dug by one strong man and a child, they should probably be here already. At that time, the teacher on Chong continued to dig and bury the passage behind him. The teacher said that if Chong didn't bury the tunnel behind him with dirt, they wouldn't be able to move forward. Chong was perfectly aware of the situation and did his best, digging in with his arms and legs to close the tunnel behind them. With each movement, his body obeyed him more and more, and the hope of salvation melted away. He felt the darkness of fatigue and despair engulfing him. Meanwhile, on the surface, the soldiers from Nanyang, as they were ordered, delivered gunpowder. They immediately informed the elder that the gunpowder had been delivered and awaited his further instructions. The elder ordered to bury gunpowder in the ground around the tombstone, stepping back a little from it, and the soldiers immediately began to carry out the order. After hearing the elder's order, the cemetery supervisor was stunned. He could not understand what was happening and why it was necessary to bury the gunpowder at all. Unable to contain his terror, the overseer rushed to the elder, exclaiming that he did not understand what they were thinking about. Stepping forward decisively, the overseer blocked the elder's path, trying to stop him. With anxiety in his voice, the overseer noted that the destruction of the grave and the disturbance of his eternal sleep would cause anger and indignation on the part of his relatives. With a decisive movement, the elder swung his staff away, pushing the overseer away, and contemptuously ignored his pleas. With a disdainful look at the overseer, the elder suggested that he immediately remove the body from the tomb. Meanwhile, Chong and the teacher continued to dig the tunnel to the surface. The teacher looked back at Chan and said that the dirt was getting bigger. If this continued, they would soon be far away from each other. Chong's strength began to leave him as he fell to the ground, feeling his breathing grow heavier and his body refuse to obey. And on the surface, the Nanyang warriors, hurrying by the elder's order, were busily preparing the gunpowder for the explosion, because the teacher and Chong, digging the tunnel, were getting farther and farther away from them. At this time, with disappointment in his voice, the teacher asked Chan if he wanted to give up. Chong was silent. He was powerless. He could not utter a single word because fatigue constricted his throat. The teacher, losing his temper, hit Chan on the head. He could not understand where the passion and determination that the boy had shown in the tomb had gone. Isn't Chong going to live a long life for his big brother? And then it dawned on Chan. Remembering his older brother, he opened his eyes sharply. On the surface, the soldiers continued to bury gunpowder in the ground. When all the preparations were completed, they shouted that they had finished and it remained for them to light the wick. And Chong tried to get up and said that he would take care of himself now. The elder said that there was no reason to doubt and ordered them to set fire to the yoke. The teacher said that he would continue and let Chong decide whether to follow him or be buried alive. On the surface, the gunpowder was about to explode, so the soldiers were ordered to move away from the tomb and run for cover. Chong wasn't going to give up and said with complete confidence that he would follow the teacher. The fire, like lightning, began to spread through the wick. Chong dug the tunnel with all his might, trying to breathe. When the fire reached the powder, there was a terrible explosion that shook the earth. Hearing loud explosions on the surface, Chong and the teacher were confused. Suddenly, one of the explosions reached them, and they found themselves under the rubble. As dawn broke, the Nanyang warriors searched the debris of the graves for the bodies of Master and Chong. After half an hour of searching, one of them started shouting to the elders that they had found the bodies. The elder, wasting no time, rushed to the soldiers to make sure with his own eyes that it was them. As he approached, he actually saw the bodies of an adult and a child, and these bodies were very suitable for a red assassin. But the elder noted that it is still too early to say that this is exactly the red killer. After a couple of minutes, one of the soldiers found more corpses and called the elder and the commander. Coming closer, the elder said that it was not him. But the commander did not understand where so many dead people came from, if they had torn only one grave. Continuing their search, the soldiers found more and more new dead. The elder and the commander were shocked. They could not understand how it happened. After that, the elder said that if you believe the belief, according to which the burial on Tianyin Mountain brings luck to the descendants, and the desire to be happy is characteristic of the poor. And as it should be expected, they couldn't afford burials, and they buried them here illegally. The mountain is probably full of such graves. Then the elder fell silent and came up with a plan of further actions in his head. After a few minutes of silence, he told the commander that they should most likely abandon this venture, but he did not understand his words. And he ordered to take the followers and block the ways to Gucheng, Wanyang, and Huba. They were supposed to prevent the escape to Lushan or Dongchang, blocked by Zhonten. But before that, the elder warned that if the commander made one more mistake, he would remove him from the task. The commander ordered all the soldiers to descend from the mountain, having finished the search. When they left, from the depths of the rubble, through the thickness of the earth, a hand broke through. It was a teacher who, relieved to be saved, gasped for air. The joy of being saved suddenly faded when the teacher realized with horror that Chong was not around. Despite his exhaustion, he rushed to the rubble, desperately searching for little Chong. Suddenly, somewhere very close, the teacher felt the movement of the ground. He froze, listening to the slightest sound. Having understood where the sound was coming from, he began to dig up the ground with tremendous force. From the depths of the pile, through the dirt and dust, a small handle appeared, after which the teacher began to pull out Chong's body. After rescuing him, the teacher began to shake off the dust and dirt and asked if he was okay, to which Chong replied that he was fine. But he said that a big stone was holding the ground above him. He wanted to get out as soon as possible, but he thought that it would be better to wait until the Nanyang warriors left. The teacher smiled and replied that he thought so too, and they worked perfectly. Chong asked, "Well done," but before he could answer, the teacher sensed someone's presence behind them. Cold sweat flowed down his face. His eyes widened. Looking back, he saw silhouettes. Behind them, the Nanyang warriors lined up like shadows, led by a stern elder, their piercing gazes directed at the teacher and Chong. They looked at each other like that for several minutes without saying a word, after which the teacher was asked if he was the same Red Killer. The teacher answered them that they do not know who he is, and one of the warriors said that the Red Slayer and his brothers killed the innocent divine swordsman Kyuchi and shook the righteousness of the Marim, so Nanyang would fulfill the will of the 10 great sects union by carrying out the execution. The teacher ordered Chong to run and not look back. The elder asked if he had anything to say to the Red Assassin, to which the teacher replied, "Could he have a sword?" And after these words, Chong became wary. The elder said that the Red Assassin just wanted to die as a warrior. After that, he ordered to give him weapons because they are not some kind of beasts. The teacher told Chong that they would not be able to escape from them. He decided to buy time so that at least he could escape. One of the warriors threw a sword at the Red Assassin, but said that this sword was kindly given to him by an elder of the 7th rank, a black staff. Chong began to shout that if the teacher didn't leave, then he would too. But the teacher said that this was not the time for his whims. Chong was obliged to survive. The teacher was sure that he would manage. Although they spent little time together, the teacher had fun. The teacher looked at Chong with a smile and thanked him for everything. At this time, the Nanyang warriors received an order from the elder and began to attack. The teacher yelled for Chong to start running while he held them back. The warriors began to run straight at the Red Assassin, telling him to prepare to die. The Red Assassin easily held off and parried all of their attacks. After that, he tried to attack himself, but one of them managed to kick him in the stomach. Chong was standing nearby. He didn't run away. He just didn't want to leave his teacher. The teacher started shouting, "Why is Chong still here? He needs to run away now." He blocked a sword strike from one of the warriors. After that, he shouted that it was the teacher's order to run away from there immediately. Chong was upset, but there was no other way out, and he simply began to run away into the depths of the forest. After the elder and the warriors saw that Chong was running away, he ordered them to catch the boy at all costs. At that time, the other warriors continued to attack the Red Assassin, saying that each blow was retribution for the suffering caused. The Red Slayer noticed the warriors sent to catch up with Chong and became concerned. With lightning speed, he parried the blows of the warriors with his sword. Pushing them apart, the teacher made his way to the soldiers who were running after Chong. Turning around, he stood in front of the soldiers, blocking their path. The elder began to shout for the warriors to concentrate. Because this is the Red Killer himself, it was impossible to relax. And at that moment, one of the soldiers, raising his sword above the teacher's head, angrily said that they had no right to disobey. The warriors had to finish it off as quickly as possible, and one of them pointed his sword straight at the teacher. But with incredible speed, the teacher avoided the sword strike and chased after those who were running after little Chong. Leaping high above the ground, he gripped his sword and charged at them with fury. With incredible force, he cut open the back of one of the kidnappers, and a river of blood flowed from the wound. Wasting no time, he charged at the next warrior, preparing to deliver a crushing blow. Trying to escape, the warrior tripped and fell to the ground, and the Red Assassin swung his sword at him. Before the murderous sword could land on the warrior, he was stopped by a sudden blow from the black staff. After that, the elder shouted to one of the soldiers that if he wanted to live, he needed to catch the boy. Due to their negligence, another warrior died, which angered and saddened the elder. The warriors began to apologize and said that an easy death for such a red assassin would be a gift of fate. They were mad with anger. Their eyes were blazing with fire, and their hearts were overflowing with the desire to destroy him, grind him to dust. And the Red Killer himself was already exhausted to the limit. Losing his last strength, he understood that he had done everything he could, and the last thing was left for Chong. At that time, Little John kept running along the path in an unknown direction, not understanding what to do next. Suddenly, a large knife flew by him, which brought him into a stupor. He stopped abruptly, the blade sinking deep into the ground in front of him. Chong turned to see one of his warriors running after him, his heart clenching in panic. Overwhelmed with terror, his heart pounding as if mad, he rushed deep into the forest without looking back or thinking about stopping. All of Chong's thoughts disappeared, leaving only one terrible fear. He ran like a driven animal, not knowing where to run or where to seek salvation. Escaping from the pursuer, he grabbed a strong branch of a tree. Then he pulled her to him with all his might. After that, he let go, but this branch hit the warrior in the face, which delayed him a little. The warrior stopped for a moment and began to rub his face, trying to soothe the burning pain. He said that the adults and children of the Dead Soul Squad were all the same, and it was terrifying to think that this child would become a killer. Now he understood why the elder was so worried about this, after which he ran further to catch up with the boy. The warrior, cursing furiously, looked for Chong with his eyes, but he managed to hide in a pit, where he held his breath. Once in the hole, Chong turned around and saw the little rats calmly eating their food. John began calling to the rats, drawing their attention to him. But at that moment, a warrior found him, which greatly frightened Chong. The warrior, clenching his teeth, looked at Chong with a fierce look that showed anger and a thirst for revenge. After that, he said that he does not know the past of this child, but he must answer for the fact that he is connected with such a diabolical organization. Feeling the cold steel of the knife on his face, Chong froze, his breathing heavy and ragged, a lump of terror stuck in his throat, preventing him from uttering a single word. The warrior said that he would bury his body where there was a lot of light and brandished a knife. Suddenly, a cloud of rats appeared from the depths of the pit and rushed at the pursuer. Countless rats, like a gray avalanche, pounced on the legs of the pursuer, tightly enveloping them with their small bodies. He desperately kicked the rats away, trying to free himself from their vile grip. The warrior kicked the rats furiously, but there were so many of them that his efforts proved useless. Suddenly, one of the rats, as if mad, jumped out of the gray mass and clung to his face. A gray avalanche of rats rushed at the warrior, completely enveloping him with their bodies, while Chong seized the moment to climb out of the pit. After that, Chong called the rats with him and ran to save his teacher. At that time, the teacher himself, already losing his strength, tried to gather the last remnants of energy to continue moving forward. One of the soldiers said that if he did not want to just give up, then in this case he would be killed with one blow. With rage in his eyes, the warrior gripped the hilt of his sword and swung it at the crimson assassin. But the red assassin didn't even think of giving up. He ran up to this warrior and pushed him to the ground with all his might. The ferocious fervor of the red slayer enraged the warrior furiously. Out of anger, he pushed him to the ground, knocking him off his feet, after which he swung his sword at him, ready to deal a fatal blow. But the red assassin expertly dodged the sword strike. Rushing again at the red slayer, the warrior charged but missed. Not losing hope, the red assassin rolled onto his stomach, clutching the warrior's legs in his. After that, he pushed him to the side with all his might. He managed to grab the sword, but said that they would die together. If he could not escape, then he would take at least one of them with him. The elder said that even if some doubt the legality of the execution, but its existence proves why it is necessary. These words greatly infuriated the Red Killer, because who dared him to decide the fate of people? The elder replied that he was wrong to think that he would understand even though they were here to punish him. But that didn't mean they couldn't just kill him. Pointing his sword at the elder, the red assassin said that he would not mind if he kept him company in the other world. The elder was indignant and called him loudly. After that, he started to quickly run towards him. Then, jumping up, he hit him in the face with his knee with all his might. With such force of impact, the red assassin flew away from the elder. The black staff was serious and told him to catch him if he could. Lying on the ground, losing his last strength, the red assassin heard a familiar voice. It was little John running with all his might to save his teacher. The teacher started yelling at him because he had ordered him to run away. So why was he still here? The elder could not understand how this little boy managed to escape and where the warrior who was running after him had gone. They were standing opposite each other when suddenly they heard some strange sounds. One of the warriors asked the elder about it, but he replied that he also heard something. Strange screeching sounds were coming from the mountain that had formed during the explosion, and this sound was increasing by the minute. Jung said that he and the teacher needed to run away, to which the teacher flatly replied that they couldn't, and asked if he had any other thoughts on the matter. John requested that as soon as he gave the signal, the teacher would run after him, but the teacher himself did not understand what was happening. Meanwhile, something small, like a black cloud, was approaching them from behind the mountain, and this dark mass was moving quickly and chaotically. The warrior, scrutinizing, tried to see what was running towards them. Looking more closely, the warrior saw with horror that a huge herd of rats was rushing towards them from behind the mountain. Seeing this terrible picture, the warrior was confused, and not only he could not understand what was happening, the last people present also. Only John was determined, and waited to give the teacher a signal and run away with him. The bright eyes and sharp teeth of the rats foreshadowed danger, and the mad squeal filled the air with terror. When the rat herd was already close, the warrior shouted to the elder that he should run, but the elder did not want to hear anything, because it was their duty to fulfill the punishment, and ordered to kill them immediately. And at that moment, Chong shouted to the teacher that he should run away and started running. The non-young warriors shouted to them to stop and rushed after them. But their pursuit was short-lived. The rats, jumping out one after another, furiously rushed at them, digging in with their teeth. Looking back, the teacher was horrified to see how the rats were trying to bite the soldiers to death, and could not understand what was happening. Zhang told him that if they were slow and did not run away, the same fate would await them. The teacher heard this and started running after Zhang. Catching up with Chong, the teacher took him in his arms and started running with him, because it was faster to escape from the rats. Panting and holding the little boy in his arms, the teacher said he was doing his best and he shouldn't worry. At that time, a carrier pigeon flew to the soldiers of Nanyang, which delivered a letter from Hubu. The letter said that bodies without faces had been found again. The elder asked where exactly this was happening, to which the commander pointed his finger to one of the regions of Hubu. So far, 7 faceless corpses have been found, 5 graves dug up, and 12 reports of sightings. The commander wondered how they managed to calmly cross the borders of those regions without falling into their hands, to which the elder nodded in the direction of the path and said that they should go find out something. When the commander, warriors, and elder arrived on the land of the village, they were met by angry and sobbing women whose husbands had died at the hands of a ruthless red killer. With despair in her eyes and tears on her cheeks, one of the women rushed to the commander and said that the mere thought of her husband's soul wandering among the living killed her heart, and asked him to immediately capture this murderer and take revenge. At this time, the elder looked at the body, but said that it did not look like his face was cut to make a mask, so it was not the red killer who did it. It then became clear why they had not found any other tracks, to which the elder suggested that they were most likely trying to confuse them, and someone is probably helping the red killer in this. After that, they reached the temple located on the territory of Nanyang. There they met Manchul, a usurer, who said that he had received a bill for 200 liang for publishing a Chinese horoscope in a newspaper, and asked if it was not the same bill of the Association of Beggars. The commander asked him about the man who had given it to him, but unfortunately Manchul did not know where he was. Unable to hold back his anger, the commander grabbed Manchul by the collar and, frightened, Manchul shouted that the man had no money and begged to give him time. He promised that he would repay the debt during the meeting they arranged for today. The elder asked why Manchul was sure that this man would return, to which he replied that he would disappear after paying 10 liang instead of 200. Suddenly, during their conversation, fireworks began to shoot into the sky. Seeing them, one of the warriors said that the red killer was in Duncan, and she urgently needed reinforcements. The commander said that if that man is in Dongchan, how are they going to meet? But Manchul insisted that he was not lying. Although he was worried that the red killer would come after him after the denunciation, he still came, and he could not understand how they dared to treat him like this after that. After saying goodbye, Manchul said it was up to them to believe him or not, to which the elder replied that he should wait, and they would send the disciples with Manchul. Suddenly, a warrior started running towards them, carrying a letter in his hands and shouting that the elder should be seen immediately. The warrior handed him a letter and said that this letter was handed over by a man in a mask. Opening the letter, he read that the man, who was probably the red assassin, had paid for the two to escape on the ship. The commander was not sure whether the words of the unknown could be trusted, to which the elder said that, according to him, he was only an intermediary in the scheme to escape from the area, from which it follows that it was even more difficult for them to understand whether it was true or not. And this is precisely what the red killer achieves. If so, even if they have hundreds of clues, they will check each one to find the true one. After that, the elder gave the order to send the commander with the moneylender to set up an ambush, Sushan and Sudun on the boat, and he himself went to Dunshan. Suddenly, from the depths of the forest, a boy rushed out at incredible speed. With lightning speed, the elder took his black staff and threw it forcefully at the boy's back. Struck by the blow of the staff, the boy fell to the ground, and the Nanyang warriors began to shout that they had caught the red killer. The boy was grabbed and gagged, but he himself did not understand what was happening. The soldiers checked that he was not wearing a mask and began to ask why he decided to run away when he saw the group of Nanyang beggars. The boy began to explain that he was known in his village for his speed, and to tell him that he would receive 5 liang if he succeeded in forcing the Nanyang warriors to chase him within 2 days. The elder asked who told him this, but the boy did not know that person, so he could not answer. The elder was angered by this answer, after which he kicked the boy in the face. At this time, cutting through the waves, the ship with Chong and his teacher was rushing across the endless sea. The teacher asked about what happened on Tianyin Mountain, how a pack of rats appeared there, to which Chong replied that he was just imitating the sounds of animals. A long time ago, all the rats in the neighborhood were making the same noises, making some kind of noise, and then there was a landslide. And since then, if he starts making similar sounds, the rats start going crazy, so he thought that probably this sound in their language means to be careful. The teacher was surprised by what he heard. He did not understand whether he was protecting this child or vice versa. John didn't understand the teacher's look and thought that his mask wasn't sticking so well, but the teacher reassured him that everything was fine. Suddenly, a cry was heard from the ship to immediately stop the ship and moor it on the shore. It was a group of Nanyang beggars who were ordered to stop, thereby shocking the teacher and Chong. The teacher jumped up to see what was happening on board and was shocked by what he saw. One of the soldiers began to kill everyone who was in the port and shouted to stop the ship immediately. The captain of the ship could no longer tolerate such insolence and attacked the soldier from behind. But before he could do anything, the warrior reacted in a flash, drawing his sword and delivering a fatal blow with incredible speed, instantly killing the captain before he knew what had happened. The teacher ordered Chon to hide behind things, but if he was found, he would immediately throw him into the sea. Warrior Nanyang approached the crew member and sternly asked where their captain was, to which the man, without saying a word, just lowered his head and silently pointed his hand to the floor. Looking at the floor, the warrior saw the dead body of the man he had just killed. After that, the warrior, firmly squeezing the crew member's shoulder, said that he was now the ship's captain, but he ordered to immediately gather all the criminals on deck. When all the criminals had gathered, the warrior told them that each of them could be safely thrown into the sea, but if they cooperated, they would be allowed to continue on their way. The warrior approached one of the criminals, began to pierce him with his gaze, and the criminal, unable to withstand the onslaught, introduced himself as Dak Gyun and said that he was from Wanyang. The warrior silently grabbed Dakji's cheek, but when he realized that his face was not a mask, he let go and called the next one. While the Nanyang warrior interrogated the criminals, the teacher, moving inconspicuously, studied the area, counted the warriors, and thought of an escape plan. While the teacher was busy thinking, someone tapped him on the shoulder. Suddenly, an unknown man grabbed him and forcefully hit his head on the deck. After that, this man, whom no one knew, approached the hostess and informed that he had detained him. A second later, a young beauty burst onto the deck in a whirlwind. The teacher was horrified at the sight of the girl. The girl took out a knife and started yelling at the teacher. Did he really think he could run away? With a cry of rage, she swung her knife and charged at him. The blade of the knife cut into his shoulder, leaving a wound. Grabbing him by the collar, she screamed, and with tears in her eyes, demanded to know the location of her son immediately. He gestured with his hand towards the door they had just exited. The woman jumped out of her seat and rushed headlong towards this door, not paying attention to the people around her. She started down the stairs, calling the boy's name and trying to calm him down. Speaking softly, she urged Chan not to be afraid, to come out of hiding and come to her. After Chong didn't react, she told him to play along and pretend he was her son, Shin Shin, in order to get off the ship safely with his teacher. The boy trusted her and got up, because this was the only chance for salvation, and he could not miss it in such a dangerous situation. At that time, on the deck, the Nanyang warriors attached themselves to the woman's servant. The servant said that he was Hao's Hanchun and apologized that they were acting without permission, but it was an emergency. The man kidnapped the child of the head of their clan and tried to run away. It didn't fit in his head as soon as he dared. The warrior asked the other criminals if people from the Hao clan were present here. Next, this woman came out of the ship with a child in her arms. After saying hello, she said that her name was Bei Kim Heng, and that she belonged to the Hao clan, and that her child would be in danger if the soldiers did not succeed in stopping the ship. The warrior said that there was nothing to be thankful for, because they were just doing their job. But Bei Kim didn't agree with that, because it didn't change the fact that they had helped her, and she wanted to thank them for their help, and offered to come to the Heavenly Harmony home when they had time. After that, taking the teacher and Chong with them, they went to the boat on which they arrived. Wasting no time, they all boarded the boat together and set off, quickly gaining distance from the dangerous boat. Chong asked about the teacher's wound that Bei inflicted, but the teacher assured him that it was not serious and that he should not worry. At that time, the warriors gathered in the village of Nanyang to discuss the events of the previous night, because they had waited all night, but no one came. The elder said that he thought so. His life was in danger. It was unlikely that he would be interested in such a large amount of money, for which the commander offered to beat the usurer. The elder called for calm, warning about the loss of allies. And just at that moment, the soldiers who had returned from the ship intervened in the conversation. From the faces of the soldiers, the elder immediately understood that they had not found anything. The soldiers nodded in confirmation of his guesses, because there were no traces of the Red Killer on the ship. However, not everything was so sad. They caught the kidnapper, and this news aroused genuine interest in the elders. The warriors said that during the night, they apprehended a criminal who had kidnapped the child of the head of the Hao clan and tried to escape. But the lady of the clan was able to reunite with her child. The elder was glad to hear such good news, and the commander asked if the soldiers had received any letters during the night, when suddenly, amidst the general commotion, one of the warriors announced that a messenger from the Hao clan had come to the elder. This news caused astonishment in all those present. Bowing in a deep bow before the elder, the messenger solemnly handed him the letter, declaring that this letter was from the head of the clan. The elder, without taking his eyes off the messenger, accepted the letter and, opening it carefully, began to read. Suddenly, his hands started shaking. Gripping the letter tighter, he couldn't believe his eyes. The commander stood as if buried, unable to understand the reasons for such a violent reaction of the elder. After that, the elder said that a woman from the Hao clan helped the Red Killer escape, and she was expelled from the clan. His eyes widened and he whispered that Kim Hyung was married to the Red Assassin. What was heard caused a deep feeling of shock and surprise in all those present. The elder ordered the horses to be brought and set off immediately, because the letter said that Kim Ken had prepared a boat at Duel Pier, and if they managed to escape, the Red Killer would disappear from the Central Plains forever. At this time, Kim Kyung was dressing the teacher's wound. She said that they need to hurry, so she can only stop the bleeding. The teacher expressed his gratitude, to which she replied that thanks to her, he remained alive, because it is not easy to deceive the Nanyang Association. The teacher asked how she knew they would be on the ship, to which Kim Kang replied that the Hao clan had many connections, and the moneylender was from her clan. The teacher still could not understand why she was ready to make such sacrifices for him. In response to his words, she simply bowed her head without saying anything. Unable to contain her emotions, she shouted for him to immediately take off the damned mask. He began to remove his mask himself and ordered Chong to do the same. Soon they arrived at the appointed place, after which they slowly got off the boat to the shore, looking around cautiously. Kim Kyung thanked Han Chun for his help and warned him to be careful because now he will be hunted. Han Chun reassured her that he wasn't going to linger in the Central Plains either, and maybe when things calmed down they could meet. But for now their paths diverged. Han Chun turned the boat around and swam away, leaving them alone on the shore as they watched in silence as Han Chun's figure disappeared into the distance. After that, Kim Kyung shouted that they should run away from there as soon as possible. She has prepared a boat on the shore, and in it they will be able to cross the stormy sea, escaping from the danger that pursues them. The warriors from Nanyang were getting closer with each passing moment, giving no respite. Red Assassin, Jung, and Kim Kyung hurried to the shore where a boat was waiting for them, but what they saw shocked them. With his back to them, the head of the Hao clan stood impassively on the shore, with his characteristic calmness and majestic posture, creating an atmosphere of confidence around him. He turned sharply, and without taking his penetrating gaze from Bei Kim, asked in a stern voice where she was going, expressing clear displeasure and suspicion of her intentions. The chairman said that Kim understood that for helping the fugitive she herself became a criminal, but he did not understand what would prompt her to do such an act. And how did she repay for all that he did for her? Kim Kyung started apologizing, because she herself understood that she had no excuse. The chairman said that they were doomed because he had already warned the Nanyang Association, and they were already on their way here. The teacher, understanding the whole situation, wanted to finish everything as soon as possible. They had too little time and had to go fast to catch the boat and escape. The head smiled. He wondered how they were going to do it. Kim Kyung asked if the teacher would be able to fight in this state, but he didn't think they had any other choice. The chief did not understand how it happened that the criminal was without a sword and decided to fight without it as well. But the teacher was serious because he did not have time for such a noble gesture on his part. After that, he jumped high above the ground, threw himself directly on his head. He kicked him with all his might, knocking him back a few steps. The teacher started to attack him again, but the head was able to block the blow. The head took the initiative, but the teacher managed to dodge the blow. However, suddenly changing the trajectory of the blow, the head still hit the teacher in the face. From such a strong blow, the teacher flew back a couple of steps, barely keeping his balance. After that, he prepared to deliver another powerful blow, tensing all his muscles and concentrating on the target. When the fist was almost at his face, the head was able to dodge again at the last moment, twisting with incredible agility. But suddenly, the teacher turned around and kicked him, but the head was able to block the blow. After that, he knocked the teacher off his feet with a sharp movement and he began to fall to the ground. With a violent kick, the head hit him in the chest and he fell, hitting his head on the floor. It was painful for Young and Kim Kyung to watch what was happening, but there was nothing they could do to change the situation. The chairman told the teacher to let Bae go, but the teacher did not understand what he was talking about. But the chairman said that if he left Bae alone, he would not prevent him from getting on the boat. Kim Ken was shocked by what she heard. The teacher replied that not everything is so simple because Kim Hyung is considered an accomplice. But the head understood everything very well. That's why he asked, because he planned to drop everything and run away with Bae to Muri. Chin Ken started to stop him. She understood her whole situation. She also understood all the head's feelings towards her, but she just can't reciprocate. Her guilt for ruining their marriage, and all this time she'd been waiting for a chance to make amends, and once it happened, she couldn't stand by. They may not have lived apart for 15 years, but they are still husband and wife, and she belongs to Song Yoon, the Red Assassin. And if she stayed with her head, then he would simply live with a person whose heart does not belong to him, and she is sure that he understands that such a marriage will not last long. The chairman asked, "It's not because she doesn't like him?" Why, with tears in her eyes, Kyung Hyun said of course not. He was like a ray of light to her. After that, he just silently looked at her, but his heart was torn by pain and indescribable sadness. But barely restraining his emotions, he told them to leave immediately, without looking back or stopping. Turning his back, he added that people from Nanyang would be coming here, so they should flee as quickly as possible. Bowing her head to the ground, Kyung Hyung thanked him for everything he had done for her and said she would pray for him. After that, they quickly gathered on board the boat, prepared everything they needed and set off without wasting a single moment. The head, looking after them, took his sword in his hands with a heavy heart, after which he took and cut off his hand, making it look like he was attacked by a red killer. At this time, the Nanyang warriors were running with all their might on their horses in order to catch up before the red killer sailed away on the boat. But when they ran there, they realized that they were late. They saw the head of the clan on the ground, and the elder, pale as a canvas, jumped off his horse and rushed towards him in despair. The chairman said that his skills were not enough and he could not stop them, after which he began to apologize. Seeing this, the soldiers, the elder, and the commander were shocked and did not know what to say. Exhaling, the elder said that Nanyang's pursuit of the Red Slayer had failed. At that time, Gyun-hyung, Song-yoon, and Young were sailing across the endless sea on a boat. Kin-heng treated the teacher's wound, but said that the wound had become inflamed, and she would not be able to give the necessary treatment. It was necessary to get to the shore as soon as possible and get the medicine. Song-yoon asked why Gyun-hyung was blaming herself for everything, to which she replied that she was the one who injured his shoulder. But what Song-en meant was what she said about the marriage to the head of the Hao clan. Hyun replied that he himself knew that she could not fulfill the role of a wife and mother properly, and that she was a talentless woman, and if she hadn't been drinking then, their baby wouldn't have been hit by a cart. But Sun started shouting that it wasn't true. After all, she started drinking because of him. It was he who could not provide her with a peaceful life. And it was because of him that she constantly lived in anxiety about the future. Because of him, who caused her pain again and again. He constantly drags her along, not knowing what awaits them further along the way. After that, the two of them suddenly fell silent, and a tense silence hung in the air, as if before a thunderstorm. Sung-yoon said that seeing that they don't blame each other, it can be concluded that they are getting old. Their whole life is full of problems, and they can't change the past, and in the end, time heals. And he suggested not to mention the past, because then they were too young to understand each other's feelings. After his words, Chin Heng began to cry bitterly, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking from the sobs, and her heart seemed to be broken into small pieces. Seong-yoon hugged her and told them to forgive those young and immature Seong-yoon and Bae Kim-hyung and live in the present. After his words, Kim-hyung turned around and gave him a tight hug in return. At that moment, little Chong ran to them and called the teacher. But when he saw the two of them hugging, Chong was embarrassed and quiet, turned red as a tomato, and lowered his eyes to his feet. The teacher turned and asked what happened. Chong pointed to the exit and said that they had finally come ashore. When they got on the deck, they decided to stop there. Jun asked the teacher what he thought it was like on the shore, to which he replied that the 10 great sects would not reach them, but the place was dangerous and more careful preparations should be made. Jung said that as long as the teacher was with him, he had nothing to fear. Kim Hyun said that Song was very lucky to have a student. With a sincere smile, Jung said that the teacher is really lucky to have such a student. Chin Heng didn't say anything and just looked at him in silence, maintaining a cold calmness that hid her inner feelings. After that, she took Chona's hand, gently pulling him along, told him to sit down. She sat him down in front of her and said he was such a cute baby and running around with such a terrible hairdo. Carefully taking his locks in her hands, she began to carefully gather them into a ponytail. When the tail was ready, she turned little Chan towards her to look at the result. Suddenly, tears rolled from his eyes, surprising the woman. She couldn't understand why he was crying, but Jung explained that it wasn't because he didn't like something. It's just that every time his friends had their tails tied, he wanted to feel it himself. And now he understood how it was. That's why he cried. After his words, Kim Hyung couldn't help but burst into tears, and she tightly pressed him to her. She then said that they would raise him as their child, to which Sun replied that the child was his apprentice, which meant that he would become a member of the Dead Souls squad. But she replied that it's not scary, she just wants to give him the love she couldn't give their daughter. At that time, in the community of Dead Souls, Ekjae began to wake up his elder brother. Ekjae said that Sogo had mastered the first degree in the first stage of receiving the triple blood strike, and that the brother replied that their eyes were not deceiving about Sogo after all. Ekjae gave another piece of good news, that their brothers managed to escape after all. The elder brother was very comforted by this news, because he knew that this would be the case. Ekjae said that he would make beef soup in honor of this. After taking the dishes, he left his elder brother's room and went to the kitchen. Suddenly, looking to the side, his eyes widened with horror, and his heart froze in his chest as if it had stopped. He saw Yun in front of him, and a guard next to her attacking her. But after holding his breath, he held in the air the fist that was directed at Yun. He looked at Ekjae. Ekjae stood behind her on his knees and just started screaming, his voice cracking with pain and fear. After a couple of minutes, she was brought to her older brother, after which she began to apologize, because she did not think that everything would turn out like this. But the older brother did not see her fault here, because he decided it himself. But if she is really sorry, then he asked one request, the first and the last. She agreed to anything, and he said that Sogo was not alive and asked her not to look for him ever again. At this time, Chong, Song, and Heng reached Yunnan village. Sun said that it was a miracle that they had come this far, remained alive, and that no one in this village would know about them for sure. Yunnan is not accessible to the 10 great sects, but it is still part of the great Ming dynasty. If they walk for a month, they will reach the southern desert where they can rest. But Chong was not intimidated by anything. He was full of enthusiasm to conquer new peaks and ran ahead, showing them the way. It had been 3 long years since they settled in Yunpan. Sun woke up and went out to the yard where Hyun was waiting for him. She said that he finally got some sleep, to which Sun replied that he just didn't sleep well at night. Heng handed him some water and said that he seemed to have dreamed of his brothers again. Sun answered that, yes, but he was sure that everything would be fine with them. After that, Hyung asked how much longer he will keep Jong on the run, to which he replied, "Does she approve of his teaching method?" But in the past 3 years, all he had taught him was to run, and despite that, it was surprising that Jong had agreed to it without any objections. Sun was sure that this peaceful area was dominated by the desperation of weak prey, and even simple survival would benefit him. Hyung said that he is just afraid because Jung is much more capable than they thought. To which Sun replied that the only one who could revive a squad of dead souls was Sogo, and he had never met anyone like him, and there would hardly be anyone equal to him in the coming centuries. To which Hyun said that he was worried that Jung would point his sword at Sogo someday. After a silent answer, she added that she shouldn't think so badly of Chan. After all, even if he ordered, Jung would catch the lion at the cost of his own life. If he ordered to become Sogo's right hand, Jung would serve him faithfully until the end of his days, and this is all because he thinks about their well-being. But she still wouldn't want him to order Chong to do things like that. Not listening to Hyung, Song stood up. He stood looking off into the distance and said that she really thought he didn't know Chan that well. At that time, a wild boar was running through the thick forest, its hooves pounding on the fallen leaves, raising clouds of dust. He headed further and further into the thicket, running away from the hunters. The hunters attacked the boar with bows, throwing arrows, stones, and sticks at it, trying to corner it and prevent it from escaping. The boar, not paying attention to anything, continued his run through the dense thickets, further and further away from the pursuers. One of the hunters strained the bowstring, preparing to release an arrow that would hit the boar directly and end the hunt. However, when the arrow was almost shot from the bow, their leader stopped him. He ordered everyone to immediately stop the pursuit, realizing that further pursuit could lead to undesirable consequences. After all, if they go further without permission, their ancestors will wake up. It would be a shame, so they decided to just worship their ancestors and go home. After that, they all fell on their knees together and began to say goodbye. Suddenly, from the depths of the red cemetery, the hunters heard strange, loud sounds. The leader asked if someone obeyed and ran after the boar, but all 5 men who participated in the hunt were still there. In order to understand who was chasing the boar, the hunters got up and ran to the sounds they heard. They couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the boy Chong holding onto the boar with all his might. The boy, clinging tightly to the boar, ran between the ancient graves. After that, the boar rushed into one of the old graves. Having broken the stone, the skull of their ancestor lay under the debris. What they saw caught the breath of the hunters, and the leader gave the command to stop the boar. The old crypts began to collapse, and the leader ordered the boar to be stopped immediately. The hunters formed a barrier in front of the boar, trying to stop it. The boar, like a relentless battering ram, pushed the hunters in different directions. Chong held onto the boar tightly, giving him no chance to break free. With ferocious force, Chong hit the boar on the head. From such a powerful blow, the boar hit the ground with its head, and Chong flew a few steps away. The leader was stunned by what he saw. The boar lay motionless, showing no sign, and Chong carefully stood up. A satisfied smile appeared on his face, because he did it himself, without outside help. The victory over the boar drew a roar of joy from him. Suddenly, Chan's joyful shouts were interrupted by the stern voice of the leader. The leader began to loudly demand an explanation, but Chong did not understand what he was talking about. After all, he was just hunting a boar. John asked if they would complain that he stole it from them, but the leader wasn't talking about hunting at all. He was talking about the sacred tombs of the Red Forest that the boy had destroyed. When Jong turned around, he saw that indeed, the ruins of destroyed tombs were scattered everywhere. But Chong claimed that all the damage was caused by a wild boar, and the hunters themselves witnessed it. The leader was furious because of the boy's audacity, believing that if he had retreated in time, nothing would have happened. Chong denied everything, because the hunters were hunting the boar themselves, and if he didn't stop it, the boar would most likely destroy everything even more. The leader, furious to the extreme, grabbed Chong by the collar, not believing his ears that a boy could contradict him. After that, he lifted it above the ground and threw it aside. The leader said that the people of the plains were arrogant like this boy, and brought only misfortune, and that was why he was against leaving them on their land. Annoyed by this injustice, Jong proposed to resolve the conflict in the traditional way of the Red Forest tribe. The leader couldn't believe his ears. How dare this young man challenge him? But looking at Chan, he realized that he was serious. The leader was stunned by such audacity of the boy, not expecting such courage and determination from him, which caused him a feeling of indignation. With a flash in his eyes, Jung said that the loser would be the one who couldn't stay on his feet any longer. The leader agreed to the battle, and said that if he so wanted, then let him prepare. Meanwhile, at home, Xiong and Hyun were discussing what to make for dinner. When they finally decided what they were going to cook, Hyun suddenly froze in place as she walked away from Sun. Her gaze was captivated by the mountain, because she noticed something unusual. Taking a closer look, she called Sona to take a look as well. 4 people like shadows watched them from the mountain, They were mountain tribe people who just stood and looked at them. Heng wondered what prompted them to come to them, and for what purpose they appeared in this remote place. But suddenly they turned sharply and went away, disappearing from the field of view. After that, Hyung started yelling at Daijung. Did he go to them and get into trouble? Meanwhile, the brutal fight between Chong and the leader continued with considerable force. Chong was dealt blow after blow, and the leader said, as if mocking, that Chong should have studied his opponent better before challenging him to a duel. After another devastating blow, Chong flew away, unable to stand on his feet under the weight of the opponent's inhuman strength. The leader asked how much longer the boy was going to climb again. He had already appreciated his persistence, so he offered to end this fight. He said that he would talk to the chief about the punishment for him, and all Chong had to do was just wait calmly for the verdict. Turning away, behind him the leader heard the words of the boy that he had not finished yet. But the leader did not understand what it was all about, and told him to give up because the result would still be the same. With a stubborn gleam in his eyes, he looked at the leader, showing his willingness to fight to the end. Gritting his teeth, the leader said that if they didn't stop, Chong would most likely die. Provoked by the boy's defiant words, the leader, clenching his hand into a fist, rushed at him with fury. However, after attacking, the leader was defeated, because Chong, having demonstrated incredible dexterity, was able to evade the blow. After that, he told the leader to try to kill him, and clenching his hand into a fist, prepared to strike. The first blow was delivered to the stomach in order to distract his attention. The second blow was aimed directly at the face, hitting the jaw. This blow ignited the leader's true fury. He struck Chong hard in the face. From such a strong blow, he flew several steps forward, losing his balance and falling to the ground. The leader began to take out a shiny sword from his scabbard, with which he intended to kill the boy. One of the hunters thought that this was an overkill and tried to stop the leader, however. He was inflamed with rage and did not want to hear any objections. After that, he pulled out a sword from its scabbard and said that this boy himself asked to kill him. All the same, his fate is determined. The leader will surely give the order to kill him, having learned that the tombs were destroyed, and he will simply do what will happen anyway. He raised his sword above the boy's head, his eyes blazing with a cold glare and his lips curled into a cruel smile, then bid him farewell. Suddenly, Chong opened his eyes and did not understand what was happening, why the leader had not yet struck a blow. Fear suddenly seized the leader. His breathing turned into wheezing, and his heart pounded in his chest as if mad. When he turned around, he saw the man standing behind throw a sword at him with lightning speed. It was Sun, his father, who saved him from death at the last moment. The leader fell unconscious while the hunters bustled around, trying to bring him to consciousness. Song and Zhang, taking advantage of the general panic, rushed to run away, disappearing into the thick of the forest. When they got home, they quickly began to pack their things, and Zhang, bent under the weight of guilt, muttered an apology to his father without looking up. But Sun replied that it was not his fault. It was just that the leader should not have drawn his sword during the duel. Sun asked if Hyun packed everything, to which she replied that there weren't many things anyway, so there wasn't much to pack. When all the things were packed, it was time to leave. Hyun, sensing Jung's distress, tried to cheer him up, saying that they would find a new home that was better than this one. As soon as the door opened, they were met by an unexpected obstacle, the inhabitants of the village. Sun drew his sword to meet them, trying to hold them back. He suggested not to make the situation worse, and they would leave now. If they just let them go, there would be no problem. Then a woman appeared who spoke in the language of the Red Forest tribe. Zhang said that she said that the residents did not come to fight them, but to say something. After that, the woman started speaking in the language of the tribe again. Young said that she was talking about their leader finding peace by meeting his ancestors, to which Song said that he was very sorry that it had happened. But I hoped for understanding, because it's hard to control yourself when your child is in danger, and they wanted to live in peace with the Red Forest tribe. After which she continued that a warning signal had been given from the mountain peaks of Shuiwan. The mountain tribe would invade the Green Plains, and if the Red Forest tribe lost even more land, they would have nowhere to live. But Sun did not understand why he was being told this. The woman wanted to remind them that they owed it to them for allowing them to live on their land when they had nowhere to go, and they were still guilty of destroying the tombs. Sun said that he was extremely grateful that they allowed them to live on their land, but he thought that they needed to clarify the situation with the tribe's tomb. The woman said that the one whom Sun killed was their best warrior, and since he killed him, they wanted him to take his place and lead the Red Forest tribe into battle against the mountain tribe forces. The dream said that no matter what, it was time to leave. To which Heng said that ever since the reign of Emperor Wu Di, the people of the Central Plains had been constantly invading the southern deserts, and she doubted that they would think well of the people from the mainland after that. Hyung and Song said that they would find a better place for Jung's safety, but they don't know for sure if the other tribes will accept them. In other words, it's not possible to say with absolute certainty that the other tribes will be as kind as them. Sun wondered if Hyun was offering to help them, to which she replied that she thought the leader's request was reasonable. But Hung knew full well that Song could not hold a sword with his left hand, but suggested a trick, for example, to disperse the tribe's forces across the plains and attack using fire. Song said that if they used fire during the dry season, not only the mountain tribe would be in danger, but all the southern deserts would be on fire, to which Heng replied that she was just giving an example. But Song was serious about leaving the Red Forest tribe, because he had no reason to interfere in their affairs. Chong just stood there silently and looked at his father, but in his head he was already trying to come up with some plan to solve this situation. After that, Song told Jung not to look at him like that and gave her his decision. Jung and the woman continued to discuss the matter. Then, lowering her head, she expressed her gratitude to them. She did not expect such a turn of events at all and was infinitely happy. Her eyes shone with surprise and happiness. After that, together with the other residents, she and the other residents marched back to the village, feeling a surge of unity and support. Song said that even if he refused them, he didn't think they were too upset, to which Jong replied that he told them not to worry, because they would help. The mountain tribe oppresses the Red Forest tribe, and they must help the weak. Sun started yelling at John. How could he go against his father, make such an important decision? But Chong considered this decision correct. The death of the commander was on his conscience, because he had specifically provoked him. In the match, he could not throw a single blow, so he thought that if he was excited, he would be able to find a weak point. In the end, the commander couldn't stand his provocation and his movements became more ridiculous, and Chong managed to land 2 blows. Of course, at this point, Jung didn't think he would get angry enough to pull out his sword. Sun wondered why he decided to fight the commander in the first place, to which Chong replied that he just wanted to take part in a duel with a human, and for the past 3 years he had been running in the meadows and wastelands, and had only fought with animals that came across his path. At that moment, Jung remembered to warn his mother not to go to the lake, because there was a nest of green vipers in it. In any case, Jung understood that his father was not training him to become an animal hunter, which is why he wanted to fight a human, and that is why he provoked the commander. Seong grabbed his head with his hand, as if trying to force his confused thoughts into her, and Hyung pushed him, as if prompting. And then Heng exclaimed, "Didn't she say that the time had come?" Sun patted Joan on the head and admitted that he must not have been paying enough attention to him. Song promised John more attention, and he was happy to do anything to become his closest assistant. But his father was against John taking part in the war, and soon, after a long and tiring journey, Chong and his parents finally arrived in a small, cozy village. The leader of the village greeted them with a smile on her face. Bowing respectfully, Sun thanked the leader for their hospitable reception, expressing his sincere gratitude for being allowed into this peaceful village. From the expressions on the faces of the villagers, it was possible to understand that because of what had happened, they did not welcome him very much. But since sleep would be an excellent reinforcement, it calmed the people down. Sun understood this, so he promised to try to help with all his might. The leader of the village said that they had prepared a place for them and went to show them. But before he had time to take a single step, suddenly from the depths of the forest came deafening drum beats, piercing the silence, causing alarm. The leader said that these sounds meant that they started their movement from the peak of Shuihuan Mountain towards the plains, every time the mountain tribe moved. Thus, they try to keep them at bay. When the Chan family crossed the threshold of their new home, they were greeted with a basket of fresh fruit as a welcome gift. Saying that they could count on her support, the leader was about to leave, but Sun stopped her. He asked if there were no other soldiers who could replace the commander, to which she replied that where would they start? And there was a rumor in the village that Sun was a great expert in martial arts, so she asked him for help. Sun said that there were 3 reasons why he could not lead the tribe of the Red Forest. The first was that he did not know their language, so he would not be able to give clear orders. Secondly, he has never come up with a strategy for fighting, although he knows how to fight, but he himself is not fit for battle. And lastly, a leader must command respect from his subordinates, and someone like him does not deserve it. The leader's heart froze with excitement, She was afraid that Sun would reject her proposal and she would lose a valuable ally. But after all that was said, he said that he was going to fight, because this is exactly what he is a professional at, and he would try his best to take the place of commander. Smiling, she said she believed it and didn't doubt it for a moment, her eyes shining with hope. At that time, training was in full swing in the yard with loud shouts and heavy breathing. The fight continued between Soku and the villager. At first, Soku put up a defense in the form of a hand. After that, he hit him in the stomach with all his might, pushing him back a few steps. This blow made the opponent bend in half in pain. Ik began to explain that instead of using all his strength, he only hit him a little bit, but now he's beat up because his breath went astray. The correct breathing technique is useful not only for an attack. If you tense all the muscles while holding your breath, you can guard against any attack. After that, he turned to everyone and asked who wanted to fight him next. Behind him, he saw Chong, who was eager to try, his eyes shining with excitement. Without hesitating for a moment, Ek nodded to the boy and called him to him. But before Chong could even take a step closer, Ek made a lightning attack, his fist cutting through the air and hitting Chong directly in the jaw, sending him flying several meters. Chong fell to the ground and said that this man was different from the commander. Suddenly, a girl appeared above him, who said that someone like Jung shouldn't even try to challenge him, because Seok is the king of the Red Forest tribe's strike. Chong was stunned by the girl's sudden appearance. He couldn't figure out where she came from, but he advised her to leave, after which he tried to attack Ek again, this time with even more fury, flaring up from the previous failure. But he failed again. Ek easily hit him on the jaw and he flew away again. The faces of the local residents expressed surprise and incomprehension as to why Chong was trying so hard to defeat a clearly stronger opponent. The girl just laughed at Chong. Her laugh was loud and taunting, and he kept telling her to leave. After that, holding their hands together, the girl asked why Jun was so light-skinned, as if it was something strange and unusual. Chong replied that he in turn wondered why she was so dark. After such a question, the girl was embarrassed, her cheeks reddened and her eyes fell down. She kicked him in the face because of such an insult. After that, he lightly hit her on the head, and she began to cry loudly in public, and the residents, not understanding the situation, began to shout at him. Jung tried to explain that she started first, but his words were drowned out by the loud screams of the angry crowd. No one even wanted to listen to his version of events. Everyone had long ago decided who was right and who was guilty. When his father suddenly appeared behind him, Jung tried to explain that she was the first to start laughing at him, but his father didn't want to hear anything either. He said that Chong was wreaking even more havoc on the village, which was already tense from the upcoming battle. John didn't know what to say and just stared at his father in silence. After that, the father told him to apologize to the girl, not giving Chong even a word to say in his defense. His father's gaze grew sterner and he repeated again for Jung to apologize. The boy had no choice but to listen to his father. He apologized with a sigh. Jung asked her to accept his apology, otherwise his father would not forgive him. The girl agreed, but with the condition that he would do what she said. Not much time passed, and they were both feeding the monkeys. Jung didn't believe that she would forgive him because of this, but the girl replied that she had always dreamed of seeing monkeys so close. John said that she could ask one of the village boys to go with her, to which the girl replied that everyone was not very comfortable with her because she was the chief's daughter, and they would never let her go there. Suddenly, all the monkeys shuddered and ran away, leaving the children in awe. The girl was confused by what was going on, and Jung seemed to hear something suspicious. Suddenly, like lightning, he grabbed the girl and rushed forward. He pushed her into the thick bushes, covered her mouth with his hand, and made a sign to be silent. In a moment, people from the neighboring village started walking next to them. It was then that scouts arrived in the village and informed the chief about the approach of the enemy from the side of the Green Lowlands. Everyone realized that the inevitable war was very close, and the leader gave the order to prepare for battle. The warrior leader announced that the decisive moment had arrived and ordered all the defenders of the Red Forest to prepare. Sun, like other warriors, carefully tied his hair in preparation for the upcoming battle. Hen reported that all the men in the village were gathering right now. Sun said that if the Red Forest tribe lost or something happened to him, he asked to take Chong and return to the Central Plains. Return to the head of the ignoble clan. He will help her survive. Hyun ran to him, hugged him tightly, and told him not to say such words again. She believed in him, because he is a red killer who managed to escape from the pursuers of beggars. While the army of the plains decided to set up camp, Chong watched them from the bushes and tried to overhear their conversation. The girl asked why they had made such a long journey. Chong fell to the ground and crawled forward. realizing that every second was worth its weight in gold, because he needed to urgently warn of danger. Suddenly, a figure of a warrior from the plains appeared in front of Chong, who asked what kind of news he was bringing. Startled, Chong realized that they had fallen into a trap. In a loud voice, the warrior announced to his comrades that he had caught someone, and the comrades turned to look. Grabbing both children by their clothes, the warrior stated that they had been eavesdropping on their conversation. One of the warriors offered to get rid of them, claiming that they were useless. Another warrior suddenly exclaimed that the girl reminded him of the daughter of the leader of the Red Forest tribe. However, it was unnecessary as the battle would soon begin, and no one would be able to carry it. And then they decided to put an end to her, hearing that the girl was speechless with horror and her eyes expressed panic fear. But Chong was not going to give up and hit this warrior below the waist. Out of pain, the warrior let go of the children and began to scream. His friends began to laugh at him, because now he was defeated by a small boy. Chong grabbed the girl's hand and they started running together. One of the warriors shouted that these children would reveal their location, and they needed to catch them. The other warrior said he would catch them, but the one Chong hit stopped him. In order to take revenge, he wanted to kill this boy himself. The girl fell because she was very scared. Her legs buckled and she could no longer run. Realizing there was no other way, Jung told her to climb onto his back. They were being chased by a warrior who wanted to kill them. Chong told the girl to hold on tighter. Jung suddenly asked her if she trusted him. At that time, in the village of the Red Forest, he blessed the soldiers for victory in the battle. I prayed that the gods would give them energy in their arms and legs, and the strength to overcome all enemies. After that, they went into battle with great self-confidence. At that time, the warrior who pursued the children continued his search. With great confidence that the boy was already doomed, he noticed someone near the tree. There stood the daughter of the leader of the village of the Red Forest without Chan. When the warrior saw her, he said that he thought so. Her whole body trembled with fear. Her eyes widened with terror and cold sweat ran down her forehead. Looking around, the warrior realized that the boy had left her alone and run away. Her gaze was directed to the ground, and her breathing became heavy and intermittent. His gaze was filled with gloating, and he declared that she was unlucky as all men, even that boy, were selfish cowards. Taking a step in the girl's direction, he discovered a real snake's lair in front of him, among the thousands of snakes coiled among themselves. The warrior realized that the children were trying to trap him so that he would die. The warrior realized that the children had expected him to slip and fall while chasing the girl. However, their plan failed. Suddenly, Chong appeared from behind and pushed him into the abyss with all his might. Chong saw the warrior fall into the abyss and heard his desperate cries. The warriors faced each other, and the silence between them was filled with fear and tension. Understanding the soldiers' anxiety, Sun tried to support and calm them down. One of the chiefs said that they had nowhere to retreat, and it was better to die than to give up their land and run away. They were sure that the souls of their ancestors, who found peace in the green plains, would protect them, and victory would be theirs. Suddenly, in the middle of his speech, the warrior heard strange cries. 3 elderly men ran towards them with weapons in their hands, shouting loudly. One of them shouted menacingly that now the warriors would feel the sharpness of his spear. They were so exhausted and age showed itself that one of them tripped and fell, and the other was forced to stop. The warriors from the Green Plains began to mock the inhabitants of the Red Forest tribe. Sun ordered everyone to stay put and said that he would deal with them himself. With one swing of the sword, Sun killed one of these grandfathers. After that, he dealt with the last ones. As Sun stood by the bodies of the slain old men, voices called out to their god Abut from behind. They shouted loudly that the old warriors were now with Abuta and were happy about it. Giving a signal with a drum, the leader ordered his troops to attack and completely destroy the inhabitants of the Red Forest. With a single impulse, they rushed into battle. The warriors of the Red Forest ran to meet them with loud shouts. Both sides, like two elements, collided in a fierce confrontation. And at that moment, Chong and the girl came back. They stopped abruptly, their eyes widening in horror as they saw what was happening. The girl asked what war is, to which Chong replied that he did not know, and he himself was seeing such a thing for the first time. The girl clung even tighter to Chong, trembling with fear. Suddenly, a spark of understanding flashed through Chong, and he turned sharply and ran back to where they had come from. He said that the people who are now in the forest were hiding in order to set a trap and attack the Red Forest tribe unexpectedly. When he understood this, he wanted to stop them. They returned to the place where the snake's lair is, and June asked the girl for her apron. Quickly tearing off the apron, he tightly wrapped it around his hands, creating a semblance of gloves. Suddenly, he began to remove his pants, making the girl flinch in surprise. Young didn't understand what was wrong with her, and she asked what he was doing, after which he hit her, and said that it was not safe to stay with him while she was there, and that he would return for her later when it was all over. She asked him to promise that he would return, and he promised her that. At that time, the warriors of the Green Plains were waiting for a signal to attack the village of the Red Forest. Suddenly a signal was given and they began to rise. But at that moment, they heard a sound coming from the bushes. Looking back, they saw Chong running straight at them. The boy shouted that he had a present for them and threw his pants at them, in which he had collected poisonous snakes. The snakes' mouths were long, sharp fangs, and their venom could instantly paralyze the victim. The snakes began to envelop the warriors like the lace of death, tightly wrapping around their bodies. Their hearts pounded in panic when they realized that they had become the prey of poisonous snakes. But it was too late. The snakes were already eating into the bodies of the warriors, releasing their deadly poison that spread through the bodies. The soldiers began to scream loudly from unbearable pain. One of the warriors' eyes flashed with vengeance when he saw Chong. He didn't even have time to sigh, as the poison ran through his veins like lightning, clouding his consciousness and turning his eyes white. But Chong stood proud and steadfast like a rock in the midst of a storm. Snake bites instantly killed almost all warriors. Those who were able to survive, with swords in their hands, they rushed at the snakes, but those sensing the danger began to crawl in different directions. In conclusion, only 3 soldiers remained from the large squad. After coming to their senses, they immediately turned around, trying to grab the boy, but he had already disappeared into the thick of the forest. One of them said that they needed to find the boy, while the other noticed that their comrades continued to signal them. But there were only 3 of them left. They would not have helped, so they decided to go look for the boy anyway. At that time, Chong was preparing another trap. The warriors were sure that the boy could not run far, and they were absolutely right. Chong climbed out of the thicket behind them and threw another snake at one of the warriors. The snake landed directly on his shoulder. She bit him, and he immediately began to pass out. After that, Chong turned around and started running into the forest thicket. The 2 remaining warriors decided to go around from 2 sides to completely surround him. One of them asked where the boy hid. He struck one of the bushes with his sword, hoping to find him there. Chong was in the tree above the warrior, much closer than he could have imagined. He dropped another snake from there, right at him. The snake fell on this warrior and dug its teeth into his body. John looked at it and heard loud screams of pain. Suddenly, a sword flew at him, knocking him from the tree. The boy began to fall downwards, and the sword was thrown by the last warrior left alive. He ran straight to the place where the boy fell, in order to catch him. John began to struggle to regain consciousness and get up as the last of the snakes began to escape from his pants. His body shaking, he grabbed his pants and began to crawl, while the warrior wondered how the boy was still alive. Chong grabbed the last snake and threw it at the warrior, but he easily cut it in 2. The warrior was incredibly angry because he was disgraced. He didn't know what to say last. How to say that one little boy was able to kill a whole tribe of warriors. But he began to threaten him with revenge. He swung his sword at him with a swing, preparing to deliver the fatal blow. At the last moment, Chong spotted the sword, grabbed it, and parried the attack. After that, gripping the sword more tightly, with an animal roar, he began to attack him. His eyes flashed with frenzy. He punched him mercilessly in the stomach, and the warrior fell unconscious, and Chong breathed his last. At this time, the war continued, and Sun dealt blow after blow. Even if he was attacked from behind, he deftly repelled all attacks. The dream said in his head that the enemy's forces were superior to those of the Red Forest tribe, and they had already suffered heavy losses. He understood that if he continued like this, the tribe would be destroyed, so he had only one option left. Among the people standing on the top of the mountain, the leader had to be killed, namely the person who stood in the middle of them. They again gave a signal with drums to the soldiers who were in the forest, but the leader abruptly stopped them. After all, there was no reaction from them. What was the point of giving signals then? And he ordered to go see what they were doing, and one of them listened to the order and ran to scout. At this time, Sun looked closer and recognized the leader of the mountain tribe, Mo Jin. Suddenly, one of the soldiers began to attack him. Sun skillfully blocked the attack. After that, he took it and hit it with a sword and responded by killing the enemy. Sun thought that the only way out of the situation was to kill the leader, and began to make his way through the soldiers. After that, he jumped over them and landed on the ground, and he quickly started running towards the leader. One of the subordinates volunteered to stop him, but the leader warned him to be careful. After that, Sun and the subordinate rushed to meet each other. The sword flashed in the subordinate's hand, and with a lightning strike, he rushed at Sun. An experienced warrior, Sun effortlessly repulsed the attack. Instantly turning around, he cut his subordinate in half with a lightning strike. Then he rushed at the leader with a lightning attack. At the last moment, with the speed of a snake, the leader dodged the blow. Sun was amazed by the leader's incredible dexterity. Despite the speed and power of the blows, Sun could not touch the enemy. Unable to bear it, the leader kicked Sun, hitting him in the stomach. The leader gestured with his finger, but Sun interrupted him, saying that he still didn't understand anything. Sun stood up again because he was not going to give up. He began to attack the leader continuously, repeating the attacks again and again. After a few minutes, the leader grabbed his sword and struck his opponent's hand in which he was holding the weapon. Instantly reacting, Sun kicked the leader in the face with all his might. The leader said in a language understandable to Sun that he was disappointed in him because he expected more. Sun did not expect to hear the answer in his own language. Sun asked about the fact that the leader knew their language, but he did not see anything strange, and he attacked Sona with his sword with all his might. Scoffing, he asked if that made a difference and gave Sun a few slashes with his blade. With a lightning-fast movement, he deflected Sona's sword. Before he could regain consciousness, Sun received a powerful kick in the stomach. The force of the blow threw him several steps forward. The chieftain asked how he could possibly go after them, and why would anyone from the Central Plains help the Redwood tribe, knowing they were doomed. Suddenly, some strange sounds came from behind him. Before he could turn around, Chong appeared in front of him, flying at him with a sword. Chong ran his blade across the leader's cheek, then fell down. After that, he jumped back a couple of steps and inquired about his father's condition. The father, not answering his question, asked why he came here. The subordinates began to worry about the leader's scratch, but he calmed them down. He was surprised at how Zhang had managed to sneak so close. John asked his father if they would fight together if they had a chance to win, to which the father declared with full confidence that he would not. Zhang told the leader that he was a happy man, but he did not understand what the boy meant. Chong dropped his sword to the ground and admitted that they had lost, after which he fell to the ground and said that since the last opportunity had been lost, it would be a waste to continue the struggle, and begged for mercy and to let them die with the least pain. But the leader was interested in what the boy said before what he meant when he called him happy. Zhang replied that he had promised to teach his father martial arts, but the war had begun, and if the leader had come here 2 years later, he would have died. So he chose the right time. That's why he's happy. The leader smiled and asked if something would change after 2 years. Zhang said that he had killed everyone in the forest. He could do it without even knowing any martial arts, and asked if the leader could imagine what he could achieve with 2 years of training. But even looking into those bold eyes, the leader was confident that he would be able to win. At that moment, a subordinate who was looking for soldiers in the forest returned. He confirmed the boy's words, because the team that was in the ambush was really all killed. The leader had mixed feelings. He did not understand how the little boy could kill the whole team alone, and he was surprised that everything the boy said before that was true. But the father was no less surprised by what he heard. After that, the leader started to laugh loudly. He said that in 2 years he would be waiting for him at the same place. If John can withstand 5 of his attacks, he will win. But if he loses, his father will be executed on the same day, and the boy will be made a slave. Convinced of his own victory, Chong asked about the reward for him. He watched the boy in surprise, not understanding where he had such confidence. After a pause, he said that he would become his slave. Unexpectedly for everyone, the leader gave the order to signal for a retreat. The subordinates did not understand why, but the leader explained that if they destroy the tribe of the Red Forest now, then in 2 years with whom they will fight. After listening to the order, the subordinates signaled a retreat with the help of drums. And all the soldiers hearing him suddenly stopped. But they didn't understand why right now, because they were almost done with this war. The subordinate began to shout loudly for the soldiers to retreat. No one could understand what was happening, including the warriors of the Red Forest. But they wanted to use the opportunity and strike from behind. But the commander told everyone to stay where they were, because they were not retreating because they had lost. The leader advised Sun to train his child well for 2 years. It was the only option if they wanted to stay alive. And in 2 years they will return to see the result. Sun couldn't understand why it took 2 years. Zhang explained that after these 2 years, he would fight the head of their tribe. These words shocked the father. Chong sighed and said that everything is fine now. The war is over. And indeed, all the warriors gathered and left the territory of the Red Forest tribe. The evening came. All the wounded and those who died in battle were taken either to be treated or to be buried. Women wept over their husbands, not believing in their deaths. The leader's heart sank with horror and compassion when she heard the screams of the women and saw the suffering of the people. The leader's subordinate said that he had to tell him something important. Hyun asked about Sun's condition, but he assured her that he was fine. Chong helped carry the bodies of the dead, but he didn't understand how they could just take and leave, leaving them here. But the resident explained that they believed that when you die in battle, you end up in the arms of the god of war, Abuta, their battle cry. Abut can be translated as stay where you died. That's why they don't take the bodies. But they can't leave the bodies on the battlefield, so the people from the Red Forest clean them up themselves. Hyung said that she had been looking for Jung everywhere and asked if he had been on the battlefield the whole time, to which Sun replied that he did, and this child again saved him from death. The leader of the Red Forest approached Chong. She said that she had heard that Chong had intervened and stopped the war. She thanked him for saving her, but the boy said that these were little things and that they had 2 years. The leader said that everything depends on what he spends these 2 years on. He can become nobody or somebody, and from this moment they will start to get stronger, because they cannot be treated like this forever. Suddenly, Jong remembered something important and he had to go. He quickly ran to the tree where he hid the girl Iorin. Running up there, he removed the leaves with which he had covered her. Jun looked into the middle of the tree and saw a girl sitting motionless like a statue. He was embarrassed and apologized for being absent for so long. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. She was very scared, but at the same time happy that John had finally come to get her. Iorin suddenly jumped out of the tree and pounced on the boy, hugging him tightly. The very next day, Chong started his studies. Father taught Chan with strictness, watching his every move. First, they started with the step of the 7 stars and the horseman's stance. Father told him not to focus too much on techniques or risers, and to divide his mass. John looked at his father, but his father asked where he was looking during training. John replied with a smile that he was now acting like his teacher. Sun said that before becoming his father, he was his teacher and told him to focus on his training. 2 years is too short a time for someone to learn martial arts, and they didn't have time to talk. Chong noticed the king of the blow watching him in the bushes, and his father told the boy to come to him, because it seemed to him that he wanted to say something. Jong approached him, but the king of strike said that he did not like the boy, because he destroyed the tomb of their ancestors and killed their commander. But since he had an important match coming up, he wanted to help in some way. And if Jong didn't mind, he wanted to teach him how to fight with his fists. Jong asked his father that the king of strike wanted to teach him something, to which his father replied that the Red Forest tribe had excellent fighting skills, and they would help if the boy mastered them. The boy asked if 2 hours would be okay, to which the king said of course they would. During the day, Jong trained with his father. His father told him not to concentrate too much on the techniques, because they could work and not work. After all, in a real battle, the guy will have to use what is best suited at a certain moment. Then he had training with the king of the punch. The king said that he would not be able to react if he only looked at the fists. He had to watch how they moved. And in the evening, he studied literature with his father. The next day, he trained again with his father. He said that the most important thing in learning martial arts is to bring your body to an ideal state. Then there was sword training. He practiced the shots, their speed, power, and his steps. Suddenly, a stone flew at him, which he easily managed to repel. It was Mo Jin's subordinate. He said that he just wanted to look at the child who challenged their commander. The boy asked if he was walking around the lands of the Red Forest too easily, to which the boy replied that Chong should not be so confident in himself, because they were all lucky that he was not in the war. And he said that Jung was grateful that the commander was so merciful, but if it was them, the boy would be dead by now. To which Jung said he could try to kill him if he wanted to, and he was willing to bet he couldn't. The subordinate began to understand why the leader decided to keep this boy alive, and said that he has a message from their commander. Jung can enter their land. There is an excellent place to train internal chi energy. But the boy did not understand why the leader of the mountain tribe made such an offer to him, to which the subordinate replied that he also did not understand, probably so that the fight would not be so sad, because there was a big gap between them. Chong was on guard because he thought that his subordinate wanted to kill him, after which he went away, with a great desire to kill the boy. In the evening, Jung told his father everything while he was sharpening his sword. Father began to tell about this leader, that he was not like everyone else. He did not use the same techniques, and Song was sure that he possessed the fighting skills of the martial arts of the plains, and even knew their language. And if he really wanted to kill him, he would have done it during the war. Therefore, his father told him to go to the place he had been told about, because it would really be perfect for training. Chong did so and started training there the very next day. Every day was the same for him, training with the King of Fists. After some time training and teaching with his father, running long distances, feeling the energy of the earth, After all, it depended on him who he would become, strong or weak. And it was not about fighting skills, but about training. He trained in all kinds of weather, trained day and night. He trained until he was completely exhausted, until the last drop of sweat rolled off his forehead. And now the last day before the decisive battle has finally arrived. As dusk fell, Yoren went out on her errands. Suddenly, Chong called her. The boy said that she had grown up a lot in these 2 years, to which the girl remained silent. She was offended by him and asked who he was, and Jung started laughing. The boy understood that she was angry with him, but he was very busy with training and could not think about anything else. The girl sarcastically replied that he had not only been thinking about himself all day. Suddenly, the smile left Jung's face, and he said that she probably knew he had a fight tomorrow, and it might be the last time they see each other. The girl fell silent and just silently looked at him. The guy said goodbye, waved at her, and left. Yoren gave a sharp cry and stopped him. After that, she said that she believed in him. Jung smiled, but in his eyes there was a gleam of reproach. He said how dare she talk to her brother like that. Turning, he waved goodbye and left. The next day, everyone was waiting for Chong to appear on the battlefield. The tribe of the Red Forest stood in front of the mountain tribes, and together they waited for the boy to appear. The subordinate told the leader that no one had seen the boy, and the leader said that the subordinate should convey to the tribe of the Red Forest that if Chong did not appear before noon, then they would renew the war that had been stopped 2 years ago. Hearing the order, the subordinate ran to inform them. He began to shout that if the child did not appear before dawn, they should get ready, because they would destroy them. Hyun asked Jung if Jong had forgotten about today, to which his father said that he most likely fell asleep because he had been practicing all night. People began to whisper that he had most likely run away, because everyone would have done the same in his place. But the King of Punches told them to shut up. Jun was not one of those irresponsible people. The commander of the Red Forest said that the mountain tribe could not be trusted, whether Chong would come or not. They were not yet sure what they would do next, so they had to be ready. Suddenly, as if from under the ground, Chong appeared from the thicket of the forest. The inhabitants said that they were waiting for him, because the warriors of the mountain tribe began to threaten that they would start a war if he did not appear. John said nothing and silently looked in their direction. The subordinate reported to the commander that Chong had arrived at the wrong place as expected. Suddenly, the boy's mother called him. John started yelling at his father how he could bring her to such a dangerous place. But his mother was just worried that he should have eaten but didn't. The boy smiled and said that he was not hungry and he liked when his body was light, and asked him to cook something tasty when he returned. Mom replied that she would be happy to cook. His father threw a sword at him and said that he, as a son, cannot leave this world before his parents. Jung grabbed this sword and told him not to worry. He promised them that he would take care of them until they were so old that they would even forget who he was. After that, he turned around, shouted that he would definitely return, and went to meet his opponent. The leader looked at the boy who was coming straight at him and asked to give him a weapon. One of the subordinates gave him a weapon, after which they both started walking towards each other. Hyun worried about her son and asked Sun if he could win just by training hard, to which he replied that Chu is a talented boy, but 2 years is too little. Hyun said that she really hoped he wouldn't come. The father was sure that his son in hopeless situations finds a way to do something impossible, and no matter what, he will impress them this time. The leader said that it seems to him that a master of martial arts should be able to fulfill his promises and come on time. After what he said, the boy was surprised that he was already considered a master. He thanked him for such words, but asked if he was saying that on purpose, so that later the leader would not be so insulting. After the boy's words, the leader angrily waved his weapon, preparing to attack. Chong drew his sword, smiled slyly, and said that his opponent had better prepare for battle. The enraged leader rose into the air to hit the boy with all his might. With all his might, he threw his weapon into battle, aiming it straight at Chong. But he was able to block this blow with ease. But at the same time that he blocked the blow, he attacked the leader with his other hand. But he was able to dodge, then tried to attack him again, but this attempt was again futile. The leader again began to attack the boy with his weapon, and taking advantage of the moment, he kicked him in the stomach and the boy flew away for a few steps. But John managed not to fall and stay on his feet. The leader began to twist his weapon in his hands with all his might. He began to praise the boy for staying on his feet after his punch, but was that all he had learned in 2 years? But Jung replied that they were just getting started. The leader yelled that he had the audacity to think that he could continue the fight and began to attack him. But Chong managed to react quickly and jump to the other side, after which, with incredible speed, he began to run around the leader. Then behind him, Chong prepared to strike. But as soon as he struck, the leader suddenly disappeared from sight. and in a moment he appeared behind and kicked Chong on the back, after which in another second he attacked with his weapon. His weapon instantly wrapped around Zhang's neck like a boa constrictor. The boy was confused. He did not know what to do in such a difficult situation. The parents were very worried about their son. Their hearts were not in the right place. The leader said that Chong had missed something of his kind. Did he expect that the leader would just rest these 2 years? He also didn't miss a single day of training, so the expectation that Chong will win is not correct. In a lightning-fast motion, he launched a chain from his weapon into the air. With incredible speed, he managed to intercept the flying chain. He yanked the chain sharply, throwing Chong to the ground. He then began to drag Chong across the ground, claiming that he had made him happy. But considering the boy weak, he decided to punish him for it. When the mother saw what was happening, she screamed in horror and rushed to Chong, begging him to stop the fight. But the father asked her to leave them alone. Father said that their presence would only get in the way and this fight was inevitable. The woman could barely contain herself, watching what was happening. Chong was lying on the ground, his chest heaving heavily, each breath accompanied by a wheezing sound as he tried to get out of the chain. Then the boy began to spin actively, trying to free himself. In a few minutes, he freed himself and stood behind the leader. Noticing this, the leader turned sharply. The leader barely had time to turn around when Chong instantly attacked him. Immediately, Chong kicked him in the face, but the leader managed to parry the blow. The force of the blow sent the leader flying back a few steps. The leader instantly attacked Chong, swinging his chain. He grabbed the opponent's sword with a chain and squeezed it tightly. With a quick movement, he snatched the sword from the boy's hands. Despite the unexpected turn of events, Chong did not lose heart, and gathering all his strength, rushed to the hand-to-hand combat. Chong attacked the leader by surprise, grabbing him by the neck. Jumping even higher, he hit his knee right in the opponent's nose. Under the influence of a strong blow, the leader staggered and took a few steps back. Not allowing the leader to recover, Chong delivered a powerful kick, hitting directly in the neck. Pushing away from each other, they ended up at some distance. Chong once again assumed a fighting stance, his eyes blazing with determination as he once again prepared to attack the leader. The boy said that although the leader trained a lot, he was able to learn more than him during all the time. Chong instantly leaped forward, his fist out, aiming to hit the leader squarely in the jaw, and said that they were now even. The leader tightened his grip on his weapon. After that, he attacked the boy from his back. Chong managed to block the blow by shielding his face, and the weapon cut his hand. Blood froze in the leader's eyes when he heard the boy's defiant words. Then he kicked him in the stomach. Despite the powerful blow, Chong was able to keep his balance and did not fall. Quickly assessing the situation, the boy dodged the attack of the leader at the last moment. Chong easily flew into the air and did a flip in the air. Quickly picking up his sword from the floor, he took a fighting stance. Chong's eyes burned with determination as he caught his breath. Gathering all his will into a fist, Chong rushed at the leader. Chong dealt the leader one blow after another, not letting him rest. The boy pushed off the ground with 2 feet and flew several meters into the air. Having made a somersault in the air, he ended up right behind the leader. With one precise blow, Chong turned the chain into 2 halves. Everyone present froze in complete shock. Those present silently watched what was happening. The leader was as surprised as everyone else and asked what kind of attack it was. Chong replied that it was called a line of opposition. This attack had been given to him by his father, but he had not fully mastered it. The boy admitted that the martial art of the leader could not be surpassed in 2 years, and he did not think that he would be able to do it. The leader wondered if Chong would admit his defeat, to which the boy smiled and said that no, because he was able to resist. But the leader did not understand what he was talking about. Chong said that the leader himself told him that if he could withstand 5 attacks, then the victory would be his, and Chong succeeded. The leader could hardly believe his ears. After that, he smiled and accepted his defeat. Chong thanked him for the battle, and he knew the leader would agree with him. The leader turned and looked at his soldiers. The soldiers stood and just looked at him in silence. After that, the leader closed his eyes and sighed heavily. The leader said that then Chong would take him among his slaves, as he had promised to do. But Chong refused and simply asked not to invade the land of the Red Forest tribe again, to which the leader replied that if they lose the battle, then the people of the mountain tribe either become slaves or die. And from that moment, Chong became his master. After that, they arrived in the village of the Red Forest, and the leader introduced them to his subordinates. The name of the first subordinate is Yuga, and the name of the other is Yuwei. And they were determined to follow the leader, so he asked them to be slaves like him. Chong and his family just stared at them in silence, not knowing what to say. The leader asked them to behave decently and not to embarrass him. Sun asked what would happen to the mountain tribe without a leader, to which he replied that they would choose a new one. But during this time, a lot of blood would be shed. After that, the leader said that since Sun is the father of his master, he will be more respectful to him in the future. Young asked him not to say that, because he was very embarrassed about it. The leader replied that everything must be done correctly, and there should be no respect for slaves. And to have a slave, one must have power and strength. Therefore, under no circumstances should Chong lose his authority. Hen pointed to one of the houses and asked if they would live in it now, to which the leader replied that no, they would do everything themselves. After that, he called his subordinates, and they went to build a house for 3. When they left, Song and Jung breathed a sigh of relief, because they still couldn't get used to this. Hyun sighed and said that now that their family had grown, there was more work, and went to prepare dinner. In the evening, sitting by the fire, they talked and asked each other questions that interested them. Sun asked how the leader learned martial arts in Naname and even knows their language. Had he been to the Central Plains in his youth? The leader asked if Song knew a man named Odok Magun. He actually knew him, but he had heard that he had gone to Kunlun Mountain to avoid destruction. But he had actually gone to Namen. This person was the leader's teacher. Chong and his father were shocked by what they heard. The leader said that the teacher taught him various martial arts for 10 years, then he himself trained for another 10, but it was very difficult. But now he is in a position to teach Chona them, and decided to teach him from now on. After all, John should have trained more. It will be surprising if John doesn't take advantage of the situation and learn from him. Father said that this is very good, but they don't have much time. He has a maximum of 5 years to study, because they promised to return to the Central Plains. The leader wondered if they really wanted to return to the Central Plains, but the father said yes with complete confidence. But the leader said that this was enough to teach the master. The morning came. The sun was barely visible from behind the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastel tones. The peace of the morning was broken by the gruff voice of the ringleader urging Chan to practice before dawn. Chan's sleep was suddenly interrupted by the leader's loud shouts warning of his appearance. The boy asked his father why he could not train him further, because he could not stand the leader, to which he replied that he was not his slave. Chong clenched his teeth in rage as he dressed hastily, his every movement filled with irritation caused by the leader's insistent calls. Exploding with anger, he pushed open the door, which slammed shut behind him. The mother worriedly asked if he had answered him too sharply, but the father assured her that he had not, because he needed additional motivation for training. After that, the father sighed heavily. The mother asked why he was so calm because Jun is their son. The father replied that the day before the match with Mongan, he had made 10 knives for him to use, but he had not even touched them. It was the same when the leader of the Red Forest tribe asked for help in the war. He said that you should help the weak. John follows the path of nobility, but his father must make him a murderer. At that time, Chan began training with the leader. The leader showed an attack on the waist, which was a deception. He said that the main thing is not to put as much effort as possible into the attack, but to make the enemy believe that he is aiming exactly there. When Chong suddenly began to laugh, when the leader tried to understand what was the matter, the boy pointed a finger into the thicket. Looking around, the leader saw a girl who almost fell in the bushes. After that, he suggested that Chong take a short rest. The girl said that she decided not to come so as not to disturb her and Mo Jin, and curiously asked who Jung would fight this time. Ignoring her question, Jung asked with a smile what she was doing here. The guy jokingly assumed that she had run away from home, to which the girl, unable to contain her indignation, exclaimed that her mother had gotten her with eternal questions about the wedding. After all, it's normal for the Red Forest tribe, and her friends are already married, but Jung didn't understand what the problem was then. The boy mockingly declared that no one wanted to marry her. Despite his taunts, the girl continued to insist that she was popular with the boys. But Jung replied that no one would want to hook up with someone like her. Unable to stand the taunts, the girl could not resist and kicked him in the stomach. Angry and offended, the girl turned around and went home. When she left, Mojan said that she was in love with Chong. Jong admitted that he knew about the girl's feelings, but Mojan didn't understand, so why was he pretending not to notice? To which the boy replied that she must become the leader of the Red Forest, and he must return to the Central Plains, and that is why they will not succeed. After which Mojan asked, what will happen to him? The boy wants to leave him here and return to the Central Plains himself. The boy looked at him and said, shouldn't slaves jump into the fire after their master? Mojan confirmed his words with a smile. The next day, Yug bustled about in the thickets of the forest, desperately looking for a place to hide. He stopped abruptly and disappeared from sight, hiding behind a tree trunk. Hearing a suspicious rustling, he carefully placed his hand on the hilt of the knife, ready for any turn of events. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a blade of cold metal touched his neck. Suddenly, Chong emerged from the bushes. His figure was dark and menacing. In a cold voice, he ordered to lower his hands, threatening bad consequences. He smiled and said that Yugu was already dead. Unexpectedly, Yue jumped out from behind the shelter and with a fierce cry rushed at Chong with an axe in front of him. John reacted instantly, dodging the sweeping blow. Yue continued to attack John again and again, but he deftly parried all the blows. With a last burst of strength, Chong jumped down into the tree. With one graceful movement in the air, the boy changed his trajectory, ending up behind Yue. After that, he put a knife to Yue's throat and said that he was also dead. Quickly assessing the situation, Chong abruptly threw the weapon into the tree trunk. The boy smiled and said that Mojin was also now dead. Mojin looked out from the tree and said that he hadn't even had time to do anything yet. Chong replied that he himself had taught him that even in an ambush one could simply die, to which Mojang began to laugh loudly, and today's training ended with them losing. On the same day, Yorin came to Chong and asked to go out with her to talk. She didn't understand why he was so smart, and still didn't understand her hints. Yorin couldn't take it anymore, and the boy took her away to go away and talk. The girl sighed, but said that she wanted to marry him, and tomorrow she would bring him a dowry. But in response, Chong was just silent and didn't know what to say. Yorin thought that Chong was indifferent to her, but he confessed that they had mutual feelings, which confused the girl, because she did not understand why he did not make any moves. The guy looked at her and said that every night he falls asleep thinking about their joint and happy life. But unfortunately, these dreams were not destined to come true. Yorin couldn't understand his logic since they both wanted the same thing, and Young explained that he would be heading south soon. He needed to get back to Junwon. His words became a real blow for her. The girl, inflamed with emotions, exclaimed that she was ready to go anywhere with him and be together, to which Jung replied that Jungwon was used to death, and it was considered normal. But the thought that his beloved woman would endure this day after day killed him. One last look in his eyes broke her heart, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Desperately, she threw herself back and shouted for him to forget her, but her words were drowned in the silence of his silence. On the last day, after lunch, Sok visited them. He called Chan to have a little talk. Seok inquired about Junwon, and Young didn't hide his surprise that the rumors had spread so quickly. Seok in turn asked if he could join him. Jun was taken aback by the question, but Seok explained that he just wanted to see Junwon for himself. The boy said that he left that place at an early age, but he didn't have any good memories. But Sok understood all the dangers. Young said that if he left, he would quickly start missing Naman, but Sok was completely sure of his decision and ready for it. In the evening, Jong and his father were walking together, and the boy informed that Seok was coming with them. His father agreed and said that they had been running away from punishment for 10 years, and finally this day had come. Even Jung was very small and now taller than him, and the boy replied that it was all his efforts with his mother, and he would always be grateful for it. Father said that they were going to Junwon tomorrow. They didn't know if their punishments were cancelled, but he hoped Jung understood why they were going there. Sogo will lead a squad of dead souls, and you need to help her by becoming her arms and legs. Chong understood everything and would do everything as his father told him. His father looked at him and asked if he was upset, but Chong did not hide anything and said that he was upset. The father apologized for this, but the boy understood very well that now there was no other way out. But his father promised that Sogo wouldn't disappoint him, to which Jung replied that even if he did, he still wouldn't bother her. The boy lowered his eyes gloomily to the ground. His shoulders slumped, and his lips curled in sadness. After that, he clenched his hand into a fist and his father spoke. The next day, when everyone gathered, everyone was waiting only for the mother. The father didn't understand why she hadn't come out yet, because there weren't many things in them. The mother said that she just wanted to check that she had not forgotten anything. Jung said that the father did not understand, that she was just sad, to which the father replied that of course he understood. Jong yelled that they were going out. It was going to be a difficult journey, so they had to be prepared for anything. Full of determination, they made their way back to Junwon. Suddenly behind them, they heard some strange cries calling for Chan. They did not understand who was calling him, so they turned around. It was Yorin calling him to come with them. Jong was confused and wary, not knowing what to do next. She rushed forward with a desperate cry, demanding to be taken with her. John reacted instantly, rushing to meet her. She shouted that she didn't care what he was going to do there. She just wanted to be near him. She begged him to believe her, and he hurried to meet her. His heart sank in his chest as he stopped and opened his arms, ready to meet her. She threw herself on his neck, hugging him tightly. Time passed, winter came, and the long-awaited day when Sun was supposed to meet his brothers finally came. He fought against the fierce winter wind, heading to the place where they were supposed to meet. Entering the room, Sun began to shake off the snow. Sun, shaking off the last icicles, asked the owner to make him tea. When the innkeeper asked what kind of tea he wanted, Song answered Longjing without hesitation. The owner said that they did not have this variety due to a bad harvest, but he suggested a local popular variety of chucha, and Sun agreed. The men at the next table were surprised when they heard his order, because people come to this establishment who cannot even afford a bowl of porridge, after which they got up and began to dress and go to work, because only thanks to her they can eat something. The owner saw off the guests, looked around, and went back into the establishment. Closing the door, he asked Sun if he wanted to have tea with the company, but that was exactly what he had been waiting for. In this case, the owner asked him to follow him. He pointed to a strange room closed only by a curtain. After they entered, they started to go down the stairs. Opening the door that was at the end of the stairs, Sun was shocked, but at the same time he was happy with what he saw. His 3 brothers sat at the same table in front of him. He could not hold back tears from what he saw and began to cry. The brothers could not believe that he was here, in front of them, because they thought that he would not come. Sun knew and believed that they were all alive, but taking one brother by the hand, he realized that he had lost one of them. Looking at the other, he realized that he had lost a leg, and the third had a huge scar all over his face. Sun was saddened to see them in such a state. But one of them said that the most important thing was that they were all alive, and now they had to take revenge for what they had received. Suddenly, Yukche entered the room, who said that he was very upset that they were going to do it without him. The brothers began to ask about the well-being of the older brother, but Yukche reassured them, saying that he was healthy and eating well. After that, they asked how Sogo was doing, what happened to her, to which Yukche replied that she had graduated from martial arts. This news shocked everyone. At that time, Chong and Eorin, mesmerized by the magical winter scene, enjoyed the peace and beauty of the snowfall. John noticed that she was handling the winter very well, and Eorin said that the area suited her. Suddenly, she noticed a familiar silhouette behind Chong, after which she realized that it was John's father and shouted about it loudly. She rushed to meet him, but as she ran towards him, she tripped and fell. The father, carefully taking her by the hand, raised her to her feet. Chong asked if his father had met with the masters, to which he answered in the affirmative, and added that all the masters were alive. Chong was very happy because Dad's prayers for the masters were heard. Father said that Chong would have to go to Samido. After all, Yuki said to meet there, and there the boy will be able to see Sogo, Choksa, Yigang, and Seo Yun. Reviving the dead Soul Squad should be everyone's job, not just them, and Cho should follow Sogo. But if Cho doesn't like it, he can fight him and decide who will be in charge. Not only his father agreed with this, but also all the masters, after which Chong confidently said that he would go. His father warned him to be careful, and began to tell him about the techniques and where his opponents trained. But John cut him off in a confident tone, smiled, and told his father not to worry because he was his son. On the same day, the boy went to the pier, and meeting an unfamiliar grandfather there, asked for permission to use his boat. John explained that he needed to swim across the river and get to Samido. The grandfather expressed surprise at the boy's decision to go to this desolate place, but said it would cost 5 nyang. In a moment, their boat was already floating smoothly downstream. John said that he gave 10 nyang, and he wanted Grandpa to pick him up tomorrow morning. But if he arrives and he is not there, then Grandfather can cook back without him. Grandfather hoped that he would see Chong tomorrow, and he, in turn, only thanked him. The boat began to sail away from the shore, and the boy headed for the appointed place. John noticed a small tent ahead and headed towards it. Suddenly, a familiar voice called to him, and he stopped. Looking around, he saw Yigang in front of him, who asked how many people Chong had killed in these 10 years. The guy replied that he didn't know because he hadn't counted. But he was absolutely sure after looking at him that right now this list will become one more. Yigang was happy because now Young knows how to react to his words. After that, Yigang asked if Young knew why his teacher had been teaching him for the past 10 years. Not hearing an answer, he said that he was taught to follow Sogo's example, to become her apprentice no matter what. But he did not understand what was the point of making himself a henchman if he had never met Sogo herself. Looking at Chong, Han realized that he wasn't having an easy time either. But the boy was sure that the elders knew what they were doing. Han said that John had been raised well and Sun should be thanked for training the hunting dog properly. When they entered the tent, they saw Seo Yun and Chok Sa sitting on 2 chairs in front of them. Seok Ye Yun became incredibly beautiful, eyes that were a stunning gray color and glinted in the light, mesmerizing, and her long gray hair fell to her shoulders, giving her even more charm. At such beauty, Gan's eyes widened in surprise, and his mouth fell open in delight. Also sitting across from her on the chair was a serious Choksa. His gaze became incredibly serious, and his facial expression became more courageous, emphasizing his determination and strength. Han walks up to Yoon and says that he was waiting for this, but now that she's grown up, she's 10 times prettier, to which Yoon coldly replies that he should get off her. But Han did not stop. He said that there was no place for her in the herd of dead souls, and it would be better for him to buy a building, and she would do the farming, and they would live together in warmth and coziness. Gan's words infuriated Yoon, and in a moment she pressed the knife to his throat. She then proceeded to threaten him, saying that if he didn't want another breathing hole, he better disappear. Han started laughing loudly and said he just wanted to lighten the mood, but Chok was furious and finally told him to shut up. He gave him a menacing look and sternly told him to sit down immediately. Han looked at him with contempt. Chok grabbed his sword and said that his uncle had done the right thing by choosing this particular place. When they came face to face, Han said that he wasn't the man he used to be, and Yoon added that they should go together, and if they wanted to fight, let them do it from the outside. Chong pretended nothing was happening, quietly sat down in his chair, leaning back. He sighed softly, trying not to draw attention to himself. As Gang and Chok continued to argue bitterly, throwing angry threats at each other, the tension between them only grew. All four of them suddenly realized that Sogo was already near them, and it gave them goosebumps. Everyone started running out of the room in a frenzy. Leaving the room, they saw Sogo herself approaching them. Sogo said that she was the one who asked for the meeting to take place here, and she knows that they doubt her, but she also doesn't like forcing them to obey solely because of the master's orders. Therefore, today was the only chance to point the sword at her, and they could not lose this opportunity, after which Sogo firmly ordered not to waste time on nonsense, but to attack immediately. Chuck wondered what would happen if he won. Sogo calmly and confidently answered that she would obey him. Drawing his sword and preparing to attack, he replied that it sounded tempting. However, Yoon was ahead of him. Seizing the initiative, she quickly reacted and launched an attack. Han said that he liked her more and more, and was especially attracted to her fiery nature, while Chok remained silent. Yoon quickly rushed towards her with a sword in her hands. The girl could feel her heart beating at an accelerated pace, and victory flashed in her eyes, because her sword was already almost at Sogo's neck. A moment before the blow, Sogo performed an unexpected maneuver, narrowly missing the blade of Yoon's sword, and disappeared from view, appearing behind her. But the girl instantly reacted. Her body turned into a blur of movement, and she quickly looked around, rushed to continue attacking, but all in vain, because Sogo expertly and easily dodged every blow. After that, Sogo calmly began to slowly pull out her own sword, causing Yoon to freeze in surprise. Yoon charged again, but Sogo fought off each of them with ease. During another attack, Yoon was hit in the scabbard by Sogo's sword. With a masterful maneuver, they turned their backs to each other, and Sogo said that if she were a man, she would die for her. I asked her to help her in this. After that, she shouted for her to show what she was capable of, and Yoon began to attack again. Yoon lashed out at her opponent with renewed vigor, swords flashing like lightning and the air pierced with blades. The girl attacked tirelessly. Her every blow was aimed at least somehow hitting her opponent. Sogo tried to ignite an even greater fire in Yoon's heart, yelling for her to prove herself worthy of leading the leadership of dead souls. But at that time, she skillfully evaded any attack. Her every movement was honed to perfection. Yoon did not have time to recover, as Sogo herself already rushed to the attack. In a flash, Sogo brought the knife to Yoon's face, catching her off guard. Sogo said that she was being very careful not to hurt her, but if she took it seriously, it would be worse. Yoon instantly leapt to the side, showing impressive reaction speed. With her hands folded, Yoon said that she was admitting defeat, and from that moment on, she was at Sogo's complete disposal, which Sogo was happy about because she had such a beautiful younger sister by her side. After that, Sogo looked back at the boys and called for the next one. After her words, Choksa appeared at her as if from underground, starting a mad attack. He lunged at her, swinging his weapon with incredible force. His movements were swift as lightning, and his blows rained down on her like a hail of blows. Despite the breakneck speed of his attacks, Sogo moved with grace, easily dodging each blow. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a sharp blade flashed before his eyes. However, he did not lose heart, and continued his attack without hesitation, striking again and again without giving his opponent a moment's rest. With each step, with each successive blow, Their fight turned into a frantic dance of death, where every move could be the last. His attacks were continuous, but she dodged each one. No matter how he tried to break through her defenses, she parried all his attacks with ease, showing incredible skill. Realizing the uselessness of swords, he furiously rushed at her, trying to kick her. However, she reacted instantly and struck him hard with the hilt of her sword, stopping his attack before he could strike again. The force of the blow was such that he flew away, finding himself a few steps away. Wasting no time, she went on the offensive. Chok barely managed to react and tried to stop the attack. But when the blade of Sogo's sword was at his neck, he froze for a moment as if paralyzed, his eyes widening in surprise and his breath hitching. Holding her sword at his neck, Sogo said that he would be under her command so she could not hurt him. Bowing his head, Chok said that he would admit defeat and follow her orders from now on. Sogo said he will be a great support and it's good to have him here. After which she asked if Gang and Young would fight her. And waving her sword, she told Han to expose his. But he bowed his head to her and said that his skills were better than those of the boys. And he quickly realized that he had no chance of winning. Therefore, he humbly admits his defeat and recognizes her as his commander. Sogo inquired about De Jong, to which she was told that he was in a tent. And when he arrived on the island, it became quieter than the water and lower than the grass. Entering the tent, they saw Chan just sleeping on a chair. Such behavior shocked them, because today was supposed to be such an important moment. Sogo ordered to wake him up, and Han started trying to wake him up as Mrs. Sogo was already here. In a moment, Chong woke up, said hello, and said his name. Sogo said that from that moment, the others decided to become her assistants, to which the boy replied that he was doing the same. To which Sogo did not answer, and just continued to look at him in silence. After that, she said that she had to tell them something very important. She must become the god of death, and her words shocked everyone. It was the dream of all assassins. The god of death was a legendary assassin with absolute power, who left the 10 sects in desperation. An entity that the 10 sects could not reach even if they spread their nets. A man who fulfilled the dream of all assassins, to freely follow the path of an assassin without obeying anyone. This desire was not only her master's, but also her own. There are countless martial arts masters in Muri who became famous as the best in the world, but none of them became the god of death. Therefore, she wants them to follow her, because she will be the only person. In the evening, John told everything to his father, to which he smiled and said that he expected nothing less from Sogo. But instead of gathering 5 people to restore the dead soul unit, she ordered everyone to create their own sect. And the father replied that if they talked about the restoration everywhere, it would attract the attention of the 10 sects. And that's why it was instructed to build up their strength separately, so that the Francia couldn't get to them so easily, and then they could unite as one. And that was the most suitable plan. Zhang said that they would each receive an assassination order before the 1st of April, and it seems that Sogo wants them to attract the attention of the Heavenly Death Sect. He had no time to rest, and he was going to leave tomorrow. When night came, Zhang and Yoren talked before going to sleep, and he said that he had already said that encounters with death would become a daily thing for him. Yoren understood everything, but she still wanted to follow him. She just asked me to promise that she would never die. The guy said that he was not going to die and leave her alone. She turned to face him and shouted for him to promise exactly that. He hugged her and promised, after which they fell asleep. In the morning when Zheng was leaving, he asked Mojan to look after his family, to which he confidently replied that he would protect them at all costs. After that, he said goodbye to his family. But they, together with Yugu, Yuhui, and Soku, set off on the road. The town was engulfed by a two-faced winter, charming in its beauty and harsh cold. 2 men were walking down the street of this town discussing dirty money and alcohol. Suddenly, one of them was pushed hard in the shoulder. From such a blow, he lost his feet and fell to the ground. He started shouting after the people who pushed him that how can you push him and go on as if nothing had happened. He tried to stop them and make them apologize for what they had done. Looking around, Yugu, Yuhui, and Soku gave him a look that was so cold and penetrating. Yuhui looked at him with contempt and asked if he needed to apologize. After that, the man received a fist in the face and was left without several teeth. But Yuhui did not stop beating, remembering his words about forgiveness. While Soku was throwing punches at the man's friend and they were both insisting that they needed to apologize. The crowd gathered, but realizing the potential trouble for themselves, decided to stay away. Yugu shouted indignantly for them to stop this spectacle immediately and get out of here. This man began to say that they contacted the wrong person. Ignoring his cries, they continued to beat him, mockingly asking him what he was going to do to them. Suddenly, they heard Chan's screams and stopped. He stopped them because otherwise, all the people there would have died. The boys tried to explain, but Zhang replied that they had made a noise and now they had to leave. As he walked, Yue shouted to the men that if it weren't for their master, they would be dead by now. After that, they all went to a small cafe to eat together. A waiter hurried to their table with a question about an additional order. Zhang ordered another bottle of soja, and the waiter assured him with a smile that the drink would be served within a minute. Suddenly, the door to the cafe burst open and a group of angry boys stormed in, shouting threats, and Zhang knew immediately that this fight was about them. The leader of the angry company began to demand that the one who offended his brother should immediately appear and repent. Returning to his younger brother, he asked if this was the cafe, which he confirmed because he had been following them, and they came right here. His gaze accidentally stopped at a small company, and he recognized his abusers in them, and pointing his finger at them, he exclaimed that it was them. Their leader walked up to Yue and punched him on the head with all his might. After that, all his company surrounded them and began to ask who they were and where they came from. Yue said that to hit someone on the head is to hit his father, and he only comes out that he showed disrespect to his father. He asked the master if he could kill him, to which he replied that for disrespecting his father, he could deal with it as he saw fit. After that, Yue took his head and squeezed it tightly. With a scowl of rage, he slammed his head into the wooden surface of the table with inhuman force, as if trying to pierce the thin board with his skull. The younger brother was so surprised that he could not say a word. The other man, on the contrary, began to shout that they should be beaten. One by one, people attacked them, but it was all in vain because their power exceeded all limits. Not giving up, they continued to attack with the aim of killing the four of them. One of the men began to use a chair to somehow defend himself, but it didn't work. Yue lifted him as high as possible with all his might. But with incredible fury, he threw it on the table, breaking the table in half, while other people began to run away, so that the same thing did not happen to them. And those who did not have time to escape received a merciless kick in the face with a chair from Yue. But Soku was also not far behind, and beat everyone with his incredibly strong fists, scattering opponents like mannequins. He hit so hard that everyone who received his blow immediately lost consciousness, as if they had crashed into a stone wall. After a period of time, all who tried to fight them lay either unconscious or dead. The cafe turned into a real battlefield. Debris, broken dishes, and bent furniture were everywhere. Suddenly, an unknown grandfather said from behind that the place that should bring joy and laughter had turned into chaos, after which he asked if it was necessary to make such a fuss. He began to assume that they were a bunch of villagers who had come here hoping to take the bull by the horns. But instead of getting rich, he thought they would die before they could spend the night here. These words became a sharp knife for Yuga, and he stood up sharply and stood in front of his grandfather. His gaze darkened, and such sparkling anger burst out of his eyes that the skin on his body froze from the cold. But Chong ordered him not to block the old man's path and to move away from there. Finishing his sake, Chong again, already with a barely noticeable note of impatience, repeated to him to go away and not disturb. Yugi obeyed the master's order, but left with clenched fists, and the old man said that nowadays young people have no manners.